They gave me a form that said your title is Chief Advisor to the Prime Minister on Digital and Data.
This is Ben Warner, a British data scientist and formerly Chief Data and Digital Advisor to Boris Johnson during COVID.
One of the interesting things about COVID is the Cabinet Room has no technology in it. We had to wheel a TV in for COVID, trying to model out how the infections would spread. That is actually the high watermark of government decision making.
In 2023, he founded Electric Twin, a company at the intersection of AI, behavioural science and simulation. He talks about what the government got right and what they got massively wrong. Digital ID. That's going to cause some chaos.
When you think about what a single login is, it's essentially a digital ID. Do single login for everyone who wants it, which is loads of people.
And how do you go about doing that? So,
well,
Ben is creating synthetic populations that you can interact with to understand human decision making to help companies and governments make better decisions.
And we can now show that our accuracy is essentially the same as traditional methods. All we need to do is to build out the population they want to target. And once we've done that...
Having sat in the heart of that government, what changes would you make to the country?
I'd probably just...
Ben, great to see you.
Pleasure.
The second time in 10 days.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And actually, I've been super keen to sit down with you because you've been on an incredible journey from 10DS Downing Street right the way through to now Electric Twin and the role of an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So where did it all start, mate?
Well, I started at University College London doing physics.
Right.
Then my brother founded faculty, as it's now known, and I went to learn some AI and decided this is more interesting. And so I've spent a decade using AI, data science, trying to understand audiences. And that's what took me into Downing Street, sort of trying to help the government thinking about how it can use data and analysis to think about policy making, the big decisions about, high-speed rail, etc.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the big decisions we were making we did make some about high-speed rail, but it was mainly to do with COVID. And then from my experience in COVID, understanding how our tools around human behavior were really lacking, really didn't actually really help in those key, really important decisions. I felt we had to do something about it. And so since then, I've been working out how we can do that. And Electric Twin, the company that I co-founded, is my solution to that problem.
So that's where I've seen your face, first of all, wasn't it, on the TV in those moments of explaining the data along with a number of other people.
One of the interesting things about COVID is when you look at the modelling that was done around the epidemiology, etc., that is actually the high watermark of government decision making.
Right.
Those guys tried really hard, and I think they did a cracking job trying to model out how the infections would spread.
Yeah.
The difficulty was trying to predict how people would behave or bringing in policies to get the behaviour we needed. We actually couldn't do that. Although you see all the reports and models from the epidemiology side, on the human behaviour side, there's nothing. There are no models of human behaviour. And that's why we struggled.
The issue you were having was trying to plan what the right measures would take because it was on such a great scale, and you couldn't model that quick enough.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's a whole range of different things around COVID and the struggles within COVID. Yeah. But in this particular one, take, for instance, at one point, there was this idea that our communications were too complicated and we should simplify them.
Yep.
And so it was suggested that actually a good way of clarifying our communications was the rule of 6. So it was 6 people indoors or 6 people in a house or 6 people at a table in a pub. Now, I personally believed this was stupid because people would look at it and be like, so I can only have 5 people in my house downstairs if my kid's upstairs asleep. But in a pub, I can sit next to a table of 6? I was like, I don't think this is going to work. People are just going to be like, this doesn't make sense on a sort of human level. Now, I had no ability to back my beliefs up. It's essentially an argument, right? It's between 2 different sides. I lost that argument. We brought in the rule of 6, and I think most people thought it was crazy.
Absolutely.
And so how do you actually start to make those decisions with more than just my gut feeling? How can you actually try and understand how people would react to something like that, what they would think of it, so you can actually think about how they will respond? Now, that might seem sort of somewhat esoteric. I mean, when are we ever going to have to do that rule of 6 type of discussion every day? Well, probably not. But if you think about businesses, when they're thinking about lots of the things they do, it actually looks like that. When you think about 2-for-1 offers versus 50% off, or, loyalty points, actually almost every decision businesses are making, or almost invariably, they look like that sort of discussion.
Yes.
And they are actually guessing. So actually, how do we remove that guesswork from the business, and then also, of course, from the public sector?
Yeah, and I mean, has the public sector ever been under greater scrutiny, do you think? I always think about, when I look at the public sector today, I have this real kind of issue with the fact that you've got this 19th century bureaucratic kind of traditional structure, right, which is trying to adapt and control and contain a global, fluid, dynamic, fast-paced, moving world. And to me, I think that it's going to break before the current structure adapts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, historically, that's what we see. The old structures try and hold on for too long, and they fracture, and that causes great pain. I think there hopefully are ways around that in the modern system. I think that there are some really good people within the civil service. I think it's really important that we think that, but they are held back by a system that doesn't work. We saw that in COVID. The system did not have the capability, did not have the capacity to deal with what was, a slow-moving threat. We did have from January through till March to prepare. We did have all of summer to prepare for the sort of the rise in winter, and we just didn't have the capability or capacity to adapt. So I think it's really important that we are both critical of where government is, but also optimistic of how we can change it, how we can try and help bring better technology in, help get good people in who alongside the good people to actually deliver the sort of policies and change that we need in the UK to make it a more thriving country.
Fundamentally, it's a 19th century operating system, isn't it?
I don't even know if it's 19th century.
Well, we were just talking about...
Yeah, I would say no. I think it's slower than that, right? I mean, in some ways, the cabinet room is a table that, longer than this, but it has no technology in it. We had to wheel a TV in for COVID. The first estimates of COVID was people putting into their phones on doubling times. Even worse than that, at the start, because of the security requirements around number 10, some people weren't allowed their phones or their computers in the cabinet room. So we were having an analog, literally a discussion that could have happened, anywhere from the printing press onwards. And I think that's the problem. Like, it just doesn't have that ability to make modern decisions.
That is absolutely incredible. Just take something random like an F1, some of the most modern technology, like an F1 control room. We've got like 15 engineers sat in front of like 3 or 4 screens each with real-time data, analytics, all of that modern technology which is used by advanced businesses or sports teams. And then you've got the country which is sitting in an empty boardroom.
Yeah. It's mental. But I also think that, alongside that, we've got to understand that, the problems and the issues that these people are asked to solve are incredibly complicated. The systems and the science to be able to do that also isn't quite there. So if you look at, say, for instance, the COVID infection study that the ONS ran, an absolutely huge experiment from, randomly testing people across the country, doing really clever statistics to make that representative so we can predict the number of people who have COVID in the country. A vast data collection effort, far beyond what an F1 team could accomplish just to get a single graph to the Prime Minister. So at the same time of being like, you should use computers, they're really effective. We also should remember that actually some of these problems are really hard, and we need to keep developing our science and technology to be able to give these decision makers the data and the information they need to make better decisions. Also at the speed, because that's the other problem, right? Is that if we can't get that information or data to the decision maker fast enough, it doesn't really matter how good you are, how accurate you are.
Yeah, I'm sure I read somewhere that you said that some decisions take maybe 2 years in government in order to kind of go from collecting the data through to analysing it through their kind of existing structures. Is that right?
I mean, there's some decisions that are slow because of the system, and there's some decisions or some data sets that are slow because of the system, but there's also data sets that are just slow because of the human condition. Like if you make a change in early years schooling, you won't see if that's effective till, much later on, maybe when they start taking their exams at 18 or even beyond that. So I think it's really important that when we criticize government, we also do it with a knowing that actually some of these things are really hard. So when sometimes people say, oh, but, how do they evaluate? Why aren't they modeling that out? Because it's a really hard problem. I think it's really important that our criticism is not a sort of utopian, that there is this sort of minority report style system out there that government should be using. That minority sort report system doesn't use.
Is a criticism, though, the way that there's resistance to change to move towards it, as opposed to the fact that they're not doing it perfectly?
I think that both criticisms are fair enough.
Right.
I think that too often there is an idea that the way we have been doing stuff is the right way, and it falls back to that, and it causes untold harm.
Right.
I think COVID, we're trying to build out modern dashboards, get data to the Prime Minister, and then there's a fallback to massive PowerPoint slides that are 80 pages long. But then I also think that there is a real willingness within some of the senior leaders in the civil service to change and try and enable that change. And sometimes what they don't have access to is the really good people who can enable that change.
Right.
If you're when I was there, the cabinet secretary was Simon Case. He was a big proponent of helping to push forward data and data science.
Right.
But I always felt that he didn't have somebody who could point to and say, as a CEO would to the CTO, okay, I need you to get after this and sort of hold them accountable. So he has almost no levers to pull. Yeah. And so that, I think one of the problems with the use of technology in the civil service is the fact that often we put these leaders into positions where we don't give them levers to pull. Right. We don't give them the powers to actually create change. And then it's very hard to hold them accountable and responsible if you don't give them the ability to make changes.
How did you manage to come up with 10DS?
Yeah, I think sort of the parlance is often skunk works, but I think that overestimates what we did. We're not inventing stealth bombers by any means. I think it's a good example of where, by working with very good people within the civil service and across the civil service, Ian Diamond, who was the national statistician, Patrick Vallance, these were very senior leaders who would support the idea that we needed to get more data science into number 10. Yeah. And obviously then there's Dominic Cummings as the sort of primary advisor to the Prime Minister, who also was a big power, sort of very pro it, which meant that it gave the sort of cover, the support that we could actually build out that small scale team. And we did it by recruiting people from various different people, borrowing people. We borrowed some really good people from the ONS, borrowed a couple of people from the Cabinet Office. One guy we borrowed from the military. He was an RAF doctor into innovation. A real sort of ragtag brigade, but just focusing on how do we help the Prime Minister make better decisions. That's not what we're doing, trying to make sure that we're empowering others to do better work. So not trying to be the sort of trying to solve everything ourselves, but just the very tiny slice that we can have impact on.
And the reason it was spun out as a separate division, was that to try and kind of circumvent the bureaucracy? Or
the real reason with sort of 10DS is set up as a separate team is one, I think it's really important when you're trying to recruit really good people that they have leaders who they can speak to and understand the culture of the team they're trying to build. Yeah. I think that you can try and put technical people into sort of policy teams, etc. But it's very hard to do. So by just giving them a sort of landing point and a leadership structure that works for technology, I think that's really helpful. The other reason is actually just around recruitment. I think that if somebody applies to you with a CV saying they worked in the Cabinet Office, it's very hard for you to differentiate. There's probably tens of thousands of people who work in the Cabinet Office. Yeah. But by putting 10DS, it allows the people to signify that they're different. They're part of like an elite team. Brilliant. And so actually, I think that what we tried to do was make sure that we recruited really good people, but then we weren't really worried about where people left to. The people who were initially with part of 10DS have gone to some wonderful and really good careers. But that means that if you're somebody, say for instance, working for a top tier strategic consultancy or a big tech firm, you can think, oh, maybe I'll take a sort of 2 years, go work in 10DS for 2 years, and it will help my career. Whereas if you're at those firms and you're like 2 years and then you go work in the data science team in the cabinet office, it feels like you've taken a step backwards. So actually, the 10DS is much more of just trying to make sure that we can retain that idea of very highly talented people. And, within a sort of modern career structure, not demanding that they're like lifers within the civil service.
How was it received?
Very well. But I think that's mostly because we also fixated on, areas we could really help, areas where we could provide extra capability. We were very careful to make sure that we empowered teams, that we weren't sort of like a gatekeeper. I think that's a really important factor. I think sometimes in central teams that end up sort of overwatching other teams or sort of adding friction. So we were very careful around that. And then we only really interacted in areas where we could have impact. And I think the teams that are working on those problems, where they sort of, the cavalry comes over the hill with a bit more extra technology, a bit more expertise, also with access to senior leadership, is always appreciated.
And just to really frame that right. So you were the guy and your team were the people which were really tracking all of the data and analysing it and hopefully ahead of anyone else in the country throughout that COVID.
Key point when sort of like, we were interacting, especially around the first lockdown, 10DS doesn't exist.
Right.
10DS is a plan.
Okay.
COVID really helped a lot of people around government realise the state of affairs. So the failings that they could see, I think weren't necessarily obvious to lots of people, but in COVID made them very obvious. And that gave us a sort of an opportunity to set up 10DS, which is why 10DS is set up over the summer.
Okay.
And then the other thing is that, you can't study the whole of government in one form of data. No. There is no, when you think about even the sort of complexity of our education system or the complexity of the benefits system, that's why I think it's really important that, so that's why in 10DS we really focused on not trying to do everything. We're not going to be as expert on energy as the guys who are working on the energy system modeling in what was then BEIS. We're not going to be as expert as the Home Office on different issues. But what we can do is try and bring that together at a point that to help the Prime Minister be that intelligent customer to data, and then also be that sort of, check and balance, that when something is put in front of him, is it right? Does it actually make sense? Is this, rigorous?
Right.
And then lastly, the other thing that I think is underappreciated, what we try to do is try to help build out tools so the Prime Minister can make a decision within the meeting. So say you're the Prime Minister now, and I'm presenting you analysis, and you ask me a question, and I can't answer it. That means I have to go away. I can do, even if it takes me an hour or two to do the analysis, I might not be able to get back in your diary for 2 weeks. So we've slowed down the decision for 2 weeks. And also, you only have a certain number of meetings in your diary. So if we can answer the question within the meeting, then it speeds it up by 2 weeks, but also doubles the amount of decisions you can make. And so that's why I think people underestimate the importance of speed within analysis. Right. If you can answer people's questions really quickly, if you can engage with them within that moment, give them that ability to build the confidence to make the right decision, it has massive multiplier effects on your overall capability of an organization to make decisions.
I remember hearing something some time back. I'm sure it's related to the Pentagon or something like that. They said that when it comes to critical decisions, they should have enough data to be able to make a decision within 20 minutes. So when it comes to the kind of decisions that they make, they like to have enough information to be able to make logical, rapid decisions within a 20-minute meeting. And I always don't know whether that's complete bullshit or if it is particularly related just to the Pentagon. But I do wonder about the decision-making that happens in our country. Does that make sense? And when you talk about sat around, accessing data, waiting for 2 weeks for the next meeting, that sounds incredibly...
Yeah, it's incredibly slow.
Yeah, kind of laborious or just difficult and slow.
And I think it is. I think that, speeding up decision making, making it so in an organization you're getting the right information to the decision maker as quickly as early as possible, allowing them to make those quick decisions, and then trying to get with the understanding that fast decisions will almost always be right decisions if right decisions are taken 10 weeks too late. It's not quite the right way of saying it, but it's good enough.
Yes, yeah, got you.
And so I think that type of thing, and that's really what I was trying to, when I was in number 10, and sort of like this fixation on how can we just improve the information flows? How can we speed up the decision-making process? How can we do that so we can make this better decisions was really important. I think an interesting sort of contrary point to that, though, is that because of the way that sort of like the system is set up, I could very easily work with people across government. There's really good digital and data teams across government. They sometimes are unheralded, but they did some really good work throughout COVID. Yeah. And so they could pipe us data into like the live dashboards in number 10. So we could do like the ONS infection study and all these other real-time metrics around different stuff we had in a dashboard. However, the insight from the analysis and analysts who might sit within those different divisions and talking about what the impact of that data is, that goes through a traditional flow. That traditional flow is often them writing a note, sending in the email to maybe their minister. Their minister signs off, yes, this can go to number 10, or queries it. Right. And then that note goes up through, the various checks and balances and people signing off, both official and political, till it finally ends up with the Prime Minister. That process is just really slow. So that means that actually quite often what was happening is that the data was up to date, but we didn't necessarily have the same level of insight. Now, we were very lucky in having Patrick Vallance, who is a deep expert in these type of areas, and Chris Whitty as well. They're both have great deep expertise around these areas. So in some ways, they could do that sort of live commentary if necessary. But I do think it speaks to the fact that actually it's not just about speeding up the data flows. You actually need to be able to speed up the insight, because that's actually the really valuable bit. And how you do that, I think, is really hard. And I think that's one of the advantages that AI brings, is that actually can speed up that analysis and that insight. So decision makers aren't just making decisions off data, they're making decisions off insight, which is what you want to be.
I can't imagine what it was like to be in that environment during that period. Was there an extreme sense of pressure?
I don't really know what it was like for everyone else. Right. I don't know. And also I don't know what it was like for everyone else in COVID. I think that I was actually quite lucky, although, I'm doing a tough job in a tough environment. Yeah. At least I have agency. I got to go into work every day and try and solve hard problems. Mm. So I think that although there is, at times it was hard, I think that there was other people in harder situations.
How would you describe the environment? I'm not fishing here for kind of intimate or kind of headline catching details. It's more around just getting a sense of what it felt like to be in that environment with so much going on.
For the sort of the team of people that I was working with in number 10, the private secretaries, these are unbelievable civil servants. Yeah. I sat next to them and their emails, it's like they're downloading on a sort of slow, 56K modem. Right. That's how fast the emails are coming in. And they do an impossible job, and they manage to carry it out. So it's absolutely wonderful working with them. And, yes. A lot of the sort of success of a lot of what I accomplished is actually due to their hard work. On the flip side, it could be so frustrating sometimes interacting with the system. It wouldn't be the person, but you're just trying to get information and they're like, I get to sign off or something. So, there was this sort of two sides to it. There was the sort of people you're working with who were always amazing, and then a system you were working with, which was always appalling. Yeah. It felt like, you were working really good with great people, but running through mud.
Yeah. And I think that's important light to shine, right? Because a lot of people, for obvious reasons, it is an incredibly difficult period of time for many, many people. I was looking at the stats. I think that the mortality rate increased over those years by about 10 or 12%. There's a lot of people here, a lot of additional deaths across the country. And but it's very easy to point at people that when things weren't done perfectly or well. Now, there will be some logical mistakes, like, the one you've highlighted, which is, limiting groups to 6 and it not just some common sense lacking between some of the decisions that are made. And I looked at that. You have to accept that there are going to be mistakes made in such a complex and novel, unique situation. And I think it's really nice to hear someone actually really help me and anyone else, I guess, understand that there are a lot of really passionate, good people which are in in the government, which are working really, really hard for the right reasons with a great sense of purpose.
Yeah, 100%. But I also think those people are desperate to help learn and do better in the future. And I think that the idea that, I don't think we have learned enough from COVID. I think that if COVID struck again today, we'd be in a worse position.
Right.
We've lost a lot of very good, talented people out of government because they feel like the lessons weren't learned. They've moved on to different roles or moved out of government because they've got fed up with, running into a brick wall all these times. So, I 100% agree that, it's really important that we don't just sort of tar a whole organization, but also we should point to the fact that we were completely wrong. Right? Our modelling was just, it was in that early period, and there's all sorts of things that I think will come out through the COVID inquiry process, which will horrify people, and I think that will rightly horrify people. But I also think you're completely right in that it's also important that we try and learn some of the lessons of the successes, which were actually massive risks. The vaccine task force was a tremendous success because they took a massive risk. They went out, they procured vaccines before they even could be proven to work. And so I think that, in the COVID, the outcome of COVID is, rather than learning from the successes, for instance, that we do need to do stuff like the vaccine task force to take on that risk, really sort of go out our way. What we've done is sort of learn the lessons of actually what we need to do is shut down, don't change anything, because actually what we'll end up doing is getting hauled over the sort of, in 2, 3, 4 years' time, we'll be hauled over the coals on these tiny little things. So, I think that you can both be positive around the system, positive around the people, but also believe that we fundamentally need to change the civil service if we're going to have a vibrant country going forward.
It's only going to get more difficult, isn't it? With the rate of rapid change around us, AI and all of the other technologies, whether it's robotics or energy, automation. It's just all of these different, I guess, compounding technologies which are going to shape our next 10 or 20 years. The decision making and the data and the way that governments operate is only going to become more fractured, more exposed.
100%. It becomes more difficult. You're trying to solve more complex problems that we don't necessarily have the sort of toolkit to deal with. I think our difficulties in trying to understand how to regulate social media sites is an example of that. I don't think there are many proponents, either pro online harms or against online harms, who think online harms is a success for either side. But also to those factors, I don't think we should, obviously technology is a massive thing, but also we just have, an aging population. There are some things that are not to do with technology. They are just factors of life. And actually that creates massive burdens on the state as well.
The fact that I think our population rate is almost in collapse, less than one child per average growth rate now, and half of what it needs to be to stand still. And then you've got an aging population, like you say, which is absolutely accelerating, and it's in the post. You can't help but think that the technology is absolutely the answer to those problems, though.
100%.
And it's going to be our government's ability to embrace that change, in a adaptable, adaptive, a dynamic, a flexible way. I mean, look, I'm critical of the leadership. Just so you're aware, it's not a particular party. It's about the fact that, I heard Boris talking about ChatGPT, and someone was taking the mickey out of the way he was talking about it. It was like, it was so archaic in his kind of understanding. He was talking about, it's really great for helping me write a few notes. I'm like, mate, it's underpinning the changing civilization, not just good for reflecting on your memoir. It's kind of like seismic. I guess it's almost like there's a non-tech enabled tech generation that's leading the country. And even you see, if you see the way that AI startups are eroding existing businesses, so you've got big legacy businesses, which their biggest fear right now is the AI native startup, which comes and eats their dinner. It's not their current competition, which is enabled with a bit more AI. They're more worried about someone coming from nothing.
Yeah.
And so I think that tells you everything about the opportunity, doesn't it? And like 10DS was spun out, I guess. It's a separate lane, it's a separate team, different types of people. So, it's no coincidence you've said, actually, we want a real mix of completely different people in this team. I can't help but think that that's actually needed a full leadership perspective. Like, that's the gap.
I mean, I 100% agree. I think that we need a change from the what we have at the moment, which is a traditional politician who's being a politician and their life is politics, to people who understand AI, have built stuff, and then can come in and help solve government's problems. And I think that's actually how we're going to solve, because I think it's really important. We don't think that the challenge of the private sector exactly replicate the challenges of the public sector. DWP probably spend most of their money on the very smallest number of people who are severely disabled, and we need to give them help. But a smartphone app is not going to help those people. That's not going to change the cost basis. So we have to be solving the actual problems of government, not the sort of just thinking that we can just import these commercial ideas. And to do that, I think we need to find a way of getting people who are excellent in the private sector and convincing them to give up huge pay packets and huge opportunity costs to go work in government and have a massive impact.
Yes, and I think that's absolutely critical, because I had this time, I don't know, it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and I was thinking about my son. He would have been 3 or 4 at the time, and I was thinking about how I was brought up in an environment where we valued physical assets. My bike, my football, whatever it might have been. And then you've got youth today, and you think about what's the most important, most valuable things in their lives. And it's almost exclusively digital assets, right? And then you start to think, well, actually, if I'm less romantic about my upbringing, and I think about value, right? And let's just take the Mona Lisa. Right. Physical Mona Lisa. I say to my son, don't know which one to buy. Should I get the digital one? Should I buy the original? So my son, when he's 18 years old, would go, "What? Are you mad?" And I go, "What do you mean?" He'd go, "Well, that's decaying. It's falling apart. It's going to cost you a fortune to maintain it. Most importantly, you can only put it on one wall." Right? And he's going, "Well, here we've got, now take the romance out of it, just as a small window." And you start to think, well, actually, the problem is that as a utility, technology is way more powerful. But the problem is that if you've got an incumbent who is finding it difficult, whose value system is based on these different kind of legacy values, then that adaptation is nowhere near the pace of which the younger generation are changing. Do you know what I mean? Like it's kind of the speed at which I think change is acceptable to what the average guy on the street who's 23, 24, 25, 18 years old, whatever. It's just way, way, way different.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, because in some ways, the society's changing hugely, like you say, with people, valuing different assets.
Yes.
In some ways, society's not changing. Like, people have always valued baseball cards, rookie baseball cards, rookie NFL. We've all collected stickers, traded shinies. And so, like, almost the human condition isn't changing. Just how we represent that, how we interact with people is changing. And so I think the more interesting part of this is we barely study it. We probably spend more money studying Romans and talking about Romans in the UK than we do just studying our own society, trying to understand actually what people care about, what they value, etc. Yes. And I think in that disconnection from the lived experience, we all hear this huge amount of information about how people are changing. Most of it's not true. Most of it is somebody trying to create a narrative around something or other. And actually how is society forming? How is society changing? We know society is changing in some ways. Like, we know that there's no longer, the sort of big TV programs of the past. They no longer exist. And then, the big films, the big blockbuster films, they no longer exist, right? We're on to Jurassic Park, I don't know how, 24, right? Because we're failing to cut through with that. So there's definitely these massive things that are not changing. But there's still some things which are still there. Like, people are still spending a huge amount of money to go see Oasis. And this type of thing. So I think that's a really interesting, we're in a really interesting world where some parts of society is going through unbelievable changes, and other parts of society is exactly the same.
Yes.
You know, like if you think about the biggest decision most people make in their lives, it's who they decide to marry. At one point, that decision was made in bars. Now, the bar you go to is probably based on where you live, you know, how rich you are, etc. Whereas now people are meeting on online apps. Well, actually, that's a whole different way of making decisions, etc. And it changes. So, well, what's the impact of how that's going to affect our society? How we intermix? What the impact? I don't know the answer, but it's fascinating.
So that goes nicely from your work in 10DS. And I'm guessing that led to you identifying the need for electric twin, which is your venture.
Yeah, exactly. I think that it's really actually hard to understand populations. If you think of the simplest case, it's trying to make predictions of political elections, because we have people's previous vote share. We have, you know, an experiment every 4 years to see if we're right. We can keep updating our models, and we don't get it right. Right. But it's important that, like, we recognize that, you know, polls are struggling in the US, they struggle in France, they struggle in the UK. You know, what we're seeing is that our ability to understand our populations is decaying. But the importance of understanding our populations, as you've just rightly said, is massively increasing. So we know there's this huge opportunity there. And then when you think to the decisions that every business is making, almost invariably it's around human behavior. You know, when you're trying to build a product, what you're trying to do, you're trying to make a product that somebody cares about. You're trying to understand their problems. If you're doing a marketing campaign, will they read it? Will they find it interesting? You know, if you're thinking of expanding into a new market, well, how will they think? How is, you know, if you're a supermarket in Britain, well, how does the French think differently about supermarkets, or the Germans, or the Americans? All these things are about human behavior. And that's before we've even started talking about, like, our employees. You know, how do you make sure that you're talking to your employees in a way, especially as we think about how different parts of the society are now have talking, you know, we see increasingly polarized society. Well, that means, you know, your managers might be talking very differently to the people on the shop floors, etc. So, like, how do you help decision making within this context is crucial. And so that's what Electric Twin's trying to do: build out these tools. So when a decision maker has to make a decision around human behavior, rather than a finger in the air guesswork, they can actually, you know, test, learn, iterate, and make the best possible decision in the time they have.
Okay. And how do you go about doing that? So how have you approached cracking that nut?
Well, so what we do is we create synthetic populations. A synthetic population is simply taking real world seed data, often market research survey, but it could be, say, for instance, the behavior of users on media platform, etc. In creating that synthetic population that you can then interact with.
Okay.
And you can ask questions in a sort of software program. So in software, so that when you have a decision to make, when you want to understand how people might react to something, what they care about, you can just ask that population. Now, and that ability to ask a population in 10 seconds rather than in 4 weeks, at zero marginal cost rather than £20,000, is hugely important for businesses. Because if you imagine, you know, we were talking earlier about the time it takes for a decision to be made is crucially important. Well, if you can be asking these questions, if you can iterate at speed, you know, in seconds rather than in weeks, it adds up to a huge amount of. One of our customers is a telecoms company looking to launch a new proposition, right. And they think they've managed to do 6 months of work in 1 month just by using Electric Twin to be able to iterate, test ideas. They're still using real world data, but by having that ability to ideate, gain that deep understanding of their customer, and test and learn at speed, it just means that they can move their whole process much quicker, and then they can launch before their competitors.
Amazing. That's a lot of time. That is a lot of time saving. Tell me through the steps they've gone through. So when they work with you on that, how do they get from, you know, 0 to 100 in terms of the steps of having a successful project with you? Because
of the fact that we've, you know, invested a huge amount of time and money in the science and the sort of engine behind Electric Twin, we do really rigorous evaluations, experiments. We actually collaborate with Michael Murakrishna, professor at London School of Economics, to make sure that our scientific grounding is as accurate as possible. And we can now show that our accuracy is essentially the same as traditional methods. We ran 7 identical experiments in the UK. We pre-predicted the results of the electric twin. We pre-registered it, show it is as accurate. And the fact that that fundamental science foundation exists means that when we work with a company, all we need to do with them is to build out the population that they want to interact with, the population they want to target. Right. And then once we've done that, you can just interact with it. In fact, I can interact with some populations on WhatsApp. Wow. It's not the business use case, but I think when you slide your phone across to the CEO and says, well, just ask a question, it just fundamentally changes it. It's saying that this is a fundamentally different way of interacting with populations, and it's so much faster. Because, the idea of asking a survey question over WhatsApp that might cost you hundreds of pounds, you obviously would never do. Yes. But you can just ask a question over WhatsApp.
Amazing. And so talk to me about building that population. So put that into give me some kind of practical understanding of that. How do they go about doing that?
It's reasonably simple for the company. It's reasonably complex for us, right. But it's essentially about taking for instance, let's say, for instance, you're a company and you've got a market research survey that you've just done on your customers. Yep. That will have, let's say, for instance, 35 questions in it. And it will have lots of details about their life, what they interact with, and then, around your product. We can take that survey and we put it through our sort of data pipelines to trying to bring out as much information as possible so we can utilize it when we're making predictions. But then when it sits within our product, you can just interact with that. So say, for instance, you want to talk to young females, you can click young females, save that audience, and then you can interact with them. You can ask them questions. You can see what they care about, what they don't care about. But what's amazing about this, and what's really powerful, and some of our big customers are absolutely loving at the moment, is the fact that we're all used to these pen portraits, like, I don't know what they're called, the enthusiastic online, or right. The traditional shopper, or whatever the different words are. And usually, we've all seen those pen portraits that are PowerPoint. Yep. Incredibly useful. We shouldn't say anything. Incredibly useful for an organization to create that strategic organization. Companies spend hundreds of thousands of pounds trying to build these out. Yep. But with Electric Twin, what you can do is you can ingest your data, so you can actually have those segments. You can create those segments so everyone in your organization can instantly ask a question. Right. So rather than looking at a PowerPoint slide and then guessing, you can actually just ask that. Even more so, you can just create segmentation by asking a question. Usually we spend a lot of time I used to do it a lot, right? With my 10 years in data science, spending a lot of time trying to work out a cluster of who's most likely to be your target audience. Right. Whereas Electric Twin, you can just ask them, like, would you be interested in a high-end meal kit that allows you to, let's say, for instance, we want to look into whether people would be interested in a meal kit that means that when they leave work, that they can be prepared at work before they go to the gym in the evening. Because everyone, why do you not go to the gym in the evening? You're hungry, right? So you can imagine there's an opportunity there. Well, we can just ask our audience, and then the people who click say yes, or very likely to buy, somewhat likely to buy, you can just interact with them. You can find out, we can do like the regression analysis, we can build the pen portraits, you can then ask them further questions. So it suddenly moves it from this like very static pen portrait and sort of complex set of maths to be kind of right for no one, into this really dynamic, iterating approach where you can really sort of build out a mental model. You can ask lots of questions, so you can build that confidence as quickly as possible and as cheaply as possible.
It's very much that natural language experience that we're all used to, which is the standard now. Consumer behavior is expecting, to have
this idea of we interact with everything from text. I think is really powerful, and obviously we really want to make it so everyone's as easy as possible to use our products. Yes. But we should also forget that buttons are really useful, like, because sometimes we've all had that experience with Alexa where we say, Alexa, do something. No, doesn't do it. I only know that Alexa can do alarms and play music. It might have a load of other functionalities, but you never know what it can do. Yeah. So within our tools, I think, especially when you're trying to build out these more complex tools for users, how you can give them that really easy experience that you have within these modern, sort of assistants like ChatGPT and Claude, but then also lead them to actually show all the power that you can get through this of the tooling that you've built. And I think that design is really interesting. And actually, one of the things that we've done at Electric Twin, from an early days, is made huge investments around design, UX, etc. Because I think, it's very easy to create a really good science-based product, but fundamentally, it has to be usable for a decision maker to use it.
Yes.
And so we've also, fixated on that side of things to make sure it's as easy as possible to use so that people can just quickly get to the answer they need.
What's the minimum data set you need to get meaningful answers?
Well,
or meaningful data?
I will give you the easy answer first, and then I'll give you the very technical answer. The easy answer is like a standard market research poll of 500 to 1,000 people gives you a really good synthetic audience that you can ask questions for. The more technical answer is that because of the fact within a large language model, you can imagine our engine. Think of our engine as sort of like you've got the seed data, but then we're pulling information from the large language model.
Yep.
So in the conventional poll, you have your data you collected in the real world, and then you actually add extra data in when you weight it. You're essentially saying this is the number of men, this is the number of females, these are the number of age. So you can think you're adding a tiny bit of information. But that means that you're very prone to any errors in your seed data. Right. Whereas in Electric Twin, we're using that seed data, but instead of just using that tiny amount of information, we're using all the information that's contained within the large language model. So you can think of it as sort of like now we're combining more information with the seed data. So you can think that you need less seed data to get an accurate result.
Right.
Now, these experiments are very hard to run because surveys aren't that accurate. So small-scale surveys are inaccurate. So how do you prove that your tool is more accurate than an inaccurate survey? So, this is one of the reasons why we're doing constant experiments. We're really looking into this. And I think this is what I'm really excited by at the moment, because the discussion we've just had is before didn't matter because the only way we could ever interact with populations was through surveys. But now we have these other tools coming online within social science, which means that actually we're sort of uncovering all these little pieces that we've never considered before. Yeah. And so I actually think that, AI is going to generate like a golden age of social science. Like some of the problems we were talking about earlier of not being able to predict human behavior, etc. Fundamentally, it's because there's been a ceiling on our science up till now. Over the last 20 years, all we've discovered in human behavior is that our results don't reproduce. But now we have extra tooling. So, I think that one of the things that's really exciting is we are in the medieval age of social science. A lot of our stuff doesn't work. Yeah. Leeches didn't work. Bloodletting didn't work. But then we came through and, there's been a huge invention of science since those days. And I think we're going to go through the same thing within social science. I think it's incredibly exciting time to be in social science right now. It's
really interesting. You've just hit a bit of a nail on the head there for me. And something I'd love to dive into. And I was having a debate with some guys over the impact that AI is going to have in recruiting. There's a lot of romance again with the traditional ways that humans have solved the problem of recruiting.
Yeah.
But you've just touched on something which is really interesting, which is where I feel like it's going to go. And I can't help but think that AI recruiters of the future will identify much more scientific behavioral positives and negatives as to the success of a candidate in a role than maybe the traditional approach, right? So being able to analyze way more deeper data sets and actually being able to say, well, we've realized actually that it's not the fact that you've got someone that's got 3 years experience in a competitor that makes them a really good candidate. It's actually someone who's got 3 years as in a competitor who spent a minimum of 4 years in that competitor, who had this background and is able to join up way more dots. Actually they'd done well in a psychology GCSE or whatever it might be, a much more scientific and data-led approach to actually identifying whether the qualities of that candidate. And basically I look at that across the board. I actually think that the biggest limitation to humans with AI right now is thinking that AI will solve the problems the way that a human would solve them.
100% agree with you. I think there's two parts to it. So, for instance, civil service, for senior civil servants, they'll quite often put them through this process, which is so crazy. I might, to be fair, getting it wrong because it sounds so stupid that it probably can't be true. But they will get the senior civil servant to interact with 6 more junior candidates, still quite senior. And then a psychologist will write a report on how they interact with these people based on a Zoom call, not to do with the work environment. So I said to them at the time, this is barely science. And you're spending everyone's going through this process. Wow. Why don't I will go through it 3 times and let's see how the reports line up. Anyway, they didn't want to test it. But I think that so many companies are doing stuff like that. I mean, we know that 50% of studies don't reproduce. But when was the last time you heard a company say, oh, by the way, we've been doing all these behavioral tests, but that science didn't reproduce, so we've got to change them? Right. Never. So we know that a lot of these tests are not based on good evidence.
Yes.
And then to the point you've just made about, okay, well, we can bring in more information, we can actually think and consider. I think you're completely right. I think that we can start building out, okay, what is the actual profiles that are successful, but also for this company, for this culture, for this environment. I think that one of the things that, when we talk about sports teams, obviously sports teams, they have different cultures, they play different styles, different formations. Yet in the business world, that we don't really talk about that. We don't say, well, actually, we're a high press firm, yes, or we sit back, and counter it. And I think that actually, things like AI might allow us to be able to do that, so that actually what we're doing is we can triage people into roles where they will be more successful. I think there are many people out there whose personality types and way they work are very well suited for helping large enterprise organizations be incredibly successful. I think those people in a startup environment won't do as well, but vice versa. You take somebody who's very, very good in a startup environment, put them into that environment, they would fail. So I think we can help people find the environments they're suited to, and then they will be much more successful. So I agree. I think that AI will be massively impactful around that.
And actually you've shone a light there on a really traditional challenge, which is taking people which have come from larger organizations into smaller businesses without the resources around them. And a lot of that is guesswork, because you're trying to judge on their character and what they might have done historically, and you have a limited insight into what life might have been like in that particular large enterprise. And people go, well, I raised money when I was working for Amazon in this department. We had to raise money internally. It's exactly the same as raising money externally. I'm like, not sure it is, I think that's a different process. But actually, I'm sure there are some major organizations where if you go on a fundraise internally, it's probably more difficult than it is externally, right? And so the nuances, just like you say, and our ability to model that, it just coming down to intuition on the character.
Yeah, I'd much rather build an electric twin outside government than inside government. Yes. Oh, the idea of trying to build electric twin inside government brings out chills. I'm sure there's innovation funding. Oh, I could probably get a 20-person team started. Oh, treacle. But yeah, I think that's the thing is like, it's and also, it's the 6 people around you. You might have worked in an organization, a large organization where the person who was your boss has a very sort of startup mindset. They've mentored you in that way, so you can easily come across. But also some startups will also be, the opposite. Yeah. There isn't one startup culture, there isn't one business culture, lots of different things. So yeah, helping people to understand where they can transition to. The other thing I think that's going to be that's really interesting is I think we overuse the term generalist. Right. I think often actually people are specialists, but in dimensions we don't really talk about. So like we've been talking about like the really good civil servants. They're actually quite often, there's some of them who are unbelievable Whitehall specialists. They know how to sort of move the gears, how to get things moving, how it all works. And, every time I'd want one of them on my team.
Yes.
We don't need 10 of them on the same team. But you do, that's a really, now that person, actually, if they move to some organizations, they'll be brilliant because it's around this idea of understanding how to influence, how to cajole, how to understand the workings. But in other organizations, they will just fall flat, even though they are superb, characters. And then I think that's the case for lots of these different things. So sometimes I think when we're talking about moving these people between different companies, we're actually talking about, does the specialism that person have fit to the specialism that this company needs?
Yes. And a lot of that, though, comes into this behavioral, like you just say, this behavioral area. It's about character, right? And understanding. I'm just wondering whether you can use your tool to reverse engineer the qualities that a department needs to hire into it. So would you be able to understand the behavior of an existing team to create a profile of when you're hiring into your telecom company's team, these are the behaviors that you want to see this person model?
I think it's a really interesting question. We don't have the tool to do that right now.
Yeah.
I'm already thinking there's probably a number of ways that we could try and do that, and use our tools to try and understand that. But I think you likely could do that using our tool at the moment.
Yeah.
But it would be back engineering it.
Yes.
And that actually what you would do is you would construct it slightly differently. So we talked about for having like a seed data population and then running it through to get to the answer. Whereas what you want to do here is here's the answer, run it backward through and pull out what this data looks like on that side.
Yes.
And given the sort of complexity of our engineering, the complexity of large language models, I'm sure there's somebody who can give you an answer as to whether that's possible, but it's not necessarily me. But I just think it speaks to this idea of how these AI tools actually allow us to start thinking about these problems in a different way, start coming at these problems in a slightly different way to try and solve some of these really hard problems that sort of sit at the crux of a lot of companies.
What sources of information can you use for modeling that behavior in a company? So I guess you're looking externally at customers, but do you look at internal teams as well?
We are slowly building out with lots of different companies using this the sort of tools in lots of different areas. You know, sort of how do you understand your employees? Talk to your employees. If you think to sort of America now, if your head office is in New York and you've got a huge number of people within your organization who have a very different set of values and lived experience to that of the sort of head office. Well, how do you make sure that you're engaging with them, that your communications resonate with them, etc.? I think that's a really interesting use case of this type of tools.
Yes.
Or, for instance, a company that's trying to build out a new proposition to a new audience, like we talked about international. We're also been doing some recent experiments around building off people's behavioural, so the trace data that people leave behind within sort of digital platforms, and whether you can use that to make predictions. The problem is that the only sort of way we have of testing these is often a survey. Does it align to the survey? So interestingly, our behavioral predictions give really high accuracy on lots of questions, but when it comes to ones that maybe you wouldn't, the sort of where you'd expect people to lie, we do see a difference. So these discrepancies are really starting to be interesting, but how we build out that evidence case and how do we show that companies that they can make better decisions using these new toolings, is a journey we're still going on. And we're lucky enough to be working with some really interesting companies and partners on how we manage to do that.
The power of that becomes even greater if you become a data company, doesn't it? If you're gathering the market research data.
It could be. We don't know what the key information is around human behavior yet.
Right.
So you could spend a lot of money and a lot of time collecting a lot of market research data that isn't valuable.
Right.
Actually, the way we think about it is what we want to be able to do is have the flexibility to use the best possible information to create the best possible synthetic audience. So we are looking to build out our sort of first-party data capabilities, but we're also exploring how we can bring in other information sources to build out sort of like a realistic population. I think the way we see it is it's just simply an experiment. It's always an experiment. We have the real world, and we're always trying to improve how we understand the real world and what's the most accurate measure we can use. And then does this add to it? Does it improve? Because one of the things that I think is interesting about this is we always think you need a huge amount of information to predict humans. We don't actually know if that's true. Actually, to get to a reasonably good prediction, you might not need as much information as people suggest because of the fact that we all grew up, especially, there's this concept of cultural evolution, which is essentially this idea that evolution built the physical, our physical bodies, the hardware, if you will. Yep. But then culture is actually transmitted down. So like, your culture that you said comes from your parents. Like my culture comes from my parents, my school, my environment. And we all have these sort of culture, and you can think of that as almost the software that runs on your mind. Okay. And so you can think in some ways from sort of like the electric twin, we're trying to predict that sort of software layer. We don't know how much information is needed to predict that software layer accuracy and what's the most pertinent. Because like the large language models can contain a huge amount of information, right? We all use them for coding, for writing, business cases, for all these different things. But most of the internet is not that. Most of the internet is people talking about their thoughts, their beliefs, their ideas, and ranting. So actually we know it contains the human experience. Now, we also know that it doesn't accurately represent the human experience if you just ask it, sort of just naively act like this person.
Yes.
So the distance between where electric twin is and where the sort of generic model is significant now. But it's important to recognize that to get to the next step, to get to that behavioral, it could be less data than we expect. Or more pertinently, it could be only a bit of information, but usually that information is hidden away behind, different things. So this sort of like seeking this sort of, how do we understand the map of humanity? How do we understand how society works, etc.? It's really exciting. But, I think it's an area where if you go in with confidence, if you go in with certainty, you're going to lose. That's why, we always talk within Electric Twin of this idea that our job is not to use AI to predict human behavior. We're trying to predict human behavior. However we manage to do that, whatever we're trying to do, we're just trying to make more accurate predictions so that people can make better decisions.
It's just unbelievable to see just how the world is shifting so significantly. And you talk about, and you are right, that the fundamental objective of government or a business is to solve problems. And to do that, we want to understand, how the decisions that we are going to make are going to have an impact. And to do that, predictive modeling is the basis. The more accurate that becomes, the more efficient we can become. Is there a part of you which hopes that this will scale to the point where government will be able to use it to solve problems like it needed in the COVID inquiry?
100%. I mean, if you look at a lot of the problems that we're facing today, obesity, mental health, climate change, they're almost all around human behavior.
Yep.
We need to think about how we transition people to a healthier lifestyle or help them with mental health problems. What can we do and then how do we influence them to get there? So I think that, tools like Electric Twin will be hugely important for government to build out better policy.
But I can't help but think that also potentially gives, the government or major organizations the ability to then start to manipulate or influence the public or their audience. So is it in the hands of a malign actor? Is it a dangerous tool as well?
So the first thing to say is we have an ethics board. We've had an ethics board from early doors because I think that, AI tools are incredibly powerful, but it's really important that we build them right. So that's why we have the ethics board. For this specific question, I think that we all have this idea in our head from sort of listening to journalists around from elections where people talk about swing voters. It's almost like it's a game of hungry hippos. Like, got the two parties like this and then voters are just in the middle and, they get whacked by a message and then suddenly they're a Labour voter, or they get whacked by another message and they're suddenly a Conservative voter, and it's all over the place. Yeah. You're laughing because that's obviously not true.
Yes.
But sometimes I think we have that model in our minds that like people are easily influenced. And I think that's wrong. I think actually it's much better to think of humans as almost being pins on a pinboard. And they're, where they land is due to like their upbringing, their culture, what they value, what they care about. And then, sort of parties and campaigns actually flow across the top of them as they try and persuade that person that they actually represent that person's values or will, do what that person prioritizes. Right. So it's actually the flow of campaigns over the top. So the reason why I think that's so important is that then this idea that, governments can manipulate people. Yeah, people would start supporting government if government starts prioritizing the things people care about, solving the problems that people care about, messaging to people in a way that they understand and resonates with their lived experience. This doesn't sound like a bad thing for me. Like, in my opinion, although there's obviously, valid concerns, fundamentally these tools help government make better policies. If you see that as malign, to me, I think it's a good thing.
Yes. Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? It's just whether, again, we come back to this systemic issue in government, don't we? Which is that they're on these 4-year cycles. And as their messaging, as it go through the latter, part of their tenure in the 3rd and 4th years, starts to become obviously tailored to what they believe will drive the next vote. And we do see a gap, for sure, between what's promised and what's delivered.
100%, and that's why the public's losing trust in governments.
Yes.
Right? If you look at the last election in 2024, the big story is people voted for almost anyone they could if it wasn't one of the two main political parties, because I think that they are now of the opinion that they won't deliver on their promises. That's why I think it's really important that we start thinking about how we, get more new talent, new energy into the sort of politics and government, because I think fundamentally that's how we build a better country.
Yeah. Yes. I can't help but think that it's one of those scenarios where, and we spoke about this before, actually, before we jumped on here, which is around the fact that technology, the evolution of technology, we think about it in kind of this independent streams. So it's like, this is, if we talk about a technology and it improving, we talk about it without thinking that the wider technologies or its environment around it evolves with it at the same rate. And the typical one is crime is going to be horrendous, but then cybersecurity will accelerate at the same rate as the AI tools themselves. So there's a kind of yin and yang effect of it, right? But maybe it's the tool, the type of technology you're talking about and what you're delivering at Electric Twin is actually the technology which is the enabler of government to, because again, if you think about it, it's like this kind of AI native approach, isn't it? It's tools up. There's no way that something's going to come from the bottom up and just completely change the whole system of government. It's got to be tools that surpass it, kind of circumvent government and just go straight from almost an AI native place.
Yeah.
They don't require any kind of intrinsic material workforce organizational change. They just appear straight to the top. They're in the hands of the user with instant kind of access and success and reliability. And that's where this fascinating boom of intelligence is, isn't it? Because what you're talking about is a tool which doesn't require organizational change in order to get it into the hands of decision makers. It can actually just instantly be in the fingertips, access to direct information, better understand. So my point being that actually as you start to productize this, commercialize it at scale, the barriers to a government getting access to it and using it to make change is much more rapid than a traditional IT system, as it were.
I definitely think that. And, we're already seeing that in our customers. We're able to onboard lots of different teams within an organization and they can all use it. Because when you think of a traditional market research survey, there's only 30 questions in there, probably has to go just to the CMO. So you think most people in the organization are just guessing. Yeah. Whereas a tool like Electric Twin means that the CEO, the CMO, the CPO have this really cool, this ability to interact with synthetic populations, ask their questions at speed. That's an amazing value add for them. But to the growth manager in the secondary market, they suddenly have access to the tool as well. So that it's like this democratization of analytics. So it means that everyone in your organization can start making better decisions, not just fixated on the one decision.
Yes. Yeah, the exciting part of that is the ability to change, isn't it? The fact that procrastination comes from a lack of data, lack of information, the inability to understand what the right moves are to make in order to grow or to diversify or wherever it might be. And so it will be a change catalyst. Electric Twin is enabling people to get to the crux of stuff quicker.
Yeah, 100%. It enables, if you're almost in every situation, just being able to have that extra bit of confidence is helpful, whether that's trying to persuade, the person you're reporting to that you should do this work, whether that's about you making a decision. I think there's no one out there who doesn't want to just have that little bit extra information on how their decision might play out in the real world.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible to see. It really is. And literally every aspect of the organization, hopefully government as well, will be touched by AI. I think Bezos, I was listening to him say the other day that there will not be a single part of your kind of consumer experience or employee experience which won't be touched by AI in the next 5 years or so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we're only beginning to see the AI apps come through. In some ways, ChatGPT is the first AI app, and now we're starting to see, the second set we've sort of seen come through, like Lovable, Cursor, Claude Code, these type of products. I think Electric Twin is part of the next wave, where we're starting to think about using these tools in slightly different ways, sort of a tangent to that sort of workplace assistant. And I think, that is only the sort of the start of the wave. So I think it's incredibly exciting times. But at the same time, a lot of the things that we're actually trying to impact, a lot of the things that we're trying to change are actually, going to stick the same, just going to stay the same. Yeah. And so I think it's just really important that as we think about these, what we could do with AI, we're always thinking, well, does AI actually change it? Does it actually have impact? Because I think there's a real danger of, whether you can do something doesn't necessarily mean you should do something, or it will actually have impact. Does it actually give you that sort of 100,000 times speed up? Well, if it does, difference between a conventional pole and electric twin, 100,000 times, yeah, that seems worth doing. But actually, if it doesn't make that much of an impact, or if it's just a slightly different way, or it actually doesn't get you to the end point, then I think, we either have to think, well, what are the changes we need to do to get to the end point, or think to ourselves, maybe this isn't quite as a powerful use of AI as we thought.
Yeah. And it's not easy bringing these products to market, is it?
No.
We spoke about this first time when we sat down for 5 minutes, and you said that going from conceptual, proof of concept, idea, proof it works, to commercialized, productized, enterprise-ready platform is a real ball ache.
Yeah. I think that, looking back on electric twin, sort of like, I sort of built a prototype. That's how we raised funding. Then we spent the first 6 months, further experimentation to prove it works. 6 months proving the trust, because obviously if you're an enterprise customer, if I'm saying to you, I want you to make decisions off the back of this new tool, you're going to say, well, prove it. So how do you prove it? How do you build out your evaluations? How do you continue to improve? These massive £50,000 experiments we've run, these, tens of thousands of evaluations, they all go to building up the proof points. And then you've got to build the product that allows everyone in an organization to quickly use it. Because you're asking them to do sometimes something that's quite hard. A lot of the time we're not used to the idea that, I can interact with whoever I want with an organization. I can do message tests. I can test messages. I can do this. So it's just, and then, it's all these little frictions that of life build up to be surprisingly, or maybe for a second, for a serial entrepreneur yourself, you'd not say surprising. You would say, I know them very well then. But, they do take time. And I think that, it's really exciting to see where electric twin is when you see sort of like senior executives in big companies making decisions off the back of these sort of the products. It's really exciting. It really sort of makes the whole journey worthwhile. And I think that, but I do think that sometimes we have to be careful that we don't think that you can spin up a tool inside minutes.
Yes.
Yeah, you've always been able to do stuff like websites have been able to be templated for years. I don't know how long, actually, probably decades. Yes. Now I think about it. In some ways, 2000 doesn't seem 25 years ago, but it is.
It is, yeah.
But actually, we still have people bespokely making websites. And I think in some way, when we think about AI, there are other sort of technological transitions that we can, not necessarily say will occur, but they can at least give us some sort of patterns that we might see replicate.
Yeah, and experience is increasing rapidly. Competition is raising the standards and expectations of consumers. So gone are the days where you can have a clunky, kind of slow, minimal product. People are expecting, they might try all that, but fundamentally their experience with other products is fast and consistent and reliable and all those sorts of things. So getting an AI product to that stage where it is robust is like you say, is a lot of work to get it to that enterprise reliability. Have you dealt with the transition from physicist to data scientist to chief data science? Is chief data science advisor to number 10? Is that right?
Well, the story of the title is quite funny. So I joined number 10.
Yeah,
and nobody really knew what. They were like, this is Ben, he does data. People didn't really know what data was. There wasn't anyone who did data in number 10. Sort of quietly worked out my way, worked out where I'd be helpful with the organization. Then we sent up 10DS, etc. And, I was sort of just basically went by Ben. Then later on, HR was sort of interacting as I started leave, and they gave me a form that said, your title is Chief Advisor to the Prime Minister on Digital and Data. I thought that would have been useful to know at the
That's
So
incredible.
technically, my title, I'm probably the only person who discovered their title as they were leaving their job rather than the start of their job.
That's quite incredible.
Yeah.
Again, that's an insight for you.
That is an insight into government for you.
Yeah, remarkable. So yeah, then from there now into tech founder,
Yeah.
AI founder. How have you find that adjustment? Because it must be a significant jump from your priorities.
Yeah. An academic life is an interesting one. I think, the top tier academics work incredibly hard. They have incredible uncertainty. Your next job, I was a postdoc, I was a research fellow. Your next job, I was looking to move to the States because that's the career path you have to go on.
Right.
There were 2 machines of the type I used in the UK. So that's sort of like, maybe they would have added a third to employ me as a permanent position, maybe not. So your job prospects are sort of, so there's this long-term stress, but the day-to-day, unbelievably joyous.
Yes.
You could spend time really discussing different fundamental products. And then I was a consultant around AI, data science. It's a very different sort of lifestyle, etc. Into government again. I think that I'm lucky enough that almost invariably I've been working with very high quality people who are very smart, who are looking to try and solve hard problems.
Yep.
And I try and solve those hard problems. And whether it's a physics problem, a problem about a company trying to use AI, government trying to use AI, or trying to solve human behavior, fundamentally it comes down to that. So although the transitions and the cultures vary, actually, the 6 people I'm working with at any one time, or the 12 people I'm working with, they look very similar. Right. And the problems I'm trying to solve actually look surprisingly similar, which actually is probably an advantage because, there's that old adage of, good artists create, great artists steal. Well, I've worked in enough industries now that I can really steal from lots of places.
I'd imagine that you take a different approach to solving these problems in behavioural science, though, if you have a background as a physicist.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a great advantage. I think that one is that I haven't been trained in a lot of things that aren't true.
Right.
Fundamental advantage. But then I also just bring a slightly different way of thinking about it, slightly different sort of understanding. I also, in my PhD, I used to do a set of experiments which use a scanning tunnel microscope. I won't go into details, but it's ultra high vacuum. The temperature is lower than the background temperature of the universe because it's pumped helium, and it never worked. And whenever it did work, it was probably, it was once off, and even then it was probably you've messed something up. Right. So I've always existed. I sort of was trained in this environment where you have to be really careful about what your data is. There's always the chance that you've messed something up. Right. And so when I come over to human behavior, I think a lot of people treat surveys as though they're the sort of gold standard, whereas to me, I just look at them as a probe, as a way of that it's data, but that data doesn't necessarily give you the answer to what's happening in the population. Actually, what we want to be doing is we have a model of the world and we want to use the data to test against that. So sort of model-driven decision-making rather than data-driven decision-making. So I think that's been really helpful. And one of the reasons why, I could go into polling and be the most accurate pollster is by coming at it with that idea of, okay, here's the whole the whole thing we're doing. Where's the uncertainty? Where's the noise? Okay, let's try and adapt for that. And that, I think, is a massive advantage.
Yeah. So sounds weird, but you almost are taking a scientific approach to it.
We make some big presumptions. Like, say, for instance, we often talk about, there's lots of experiments that say, humans are irrational because they didn't replace this block rather. And actually, when you look at those experiments, often you're like, actually, I'd have done that. Not because I thought that was the instructions. So I think it's just coming at it from a sort of... humble is the wrong word when you're arrogantly talking about why you're better than some, but sort of like coming at it from almost like a zero knowledge perspective.
Yes.
Coming at it from a very low knowledge perspective, believing that you're probably wrong, that you're probably bloodletting rather than actually. And by coming at it from that approach and just trying to do the simple things and build up that way, I think that's probably the best way of thinking about it. So, there'll be a lot of people out there. The idea that I am very okay with the idea of saying social science is basically about the equivalent of medieval medicine, and being excited by it and thinking that's why it's a great thing is a slightly different perspective. I think, if you went into a behavioral science department and said, would you say you're like a bloodletter? They'd be like, no. But we don't have models. We don't have models, and so it's a.
Yeah. You've said that a couple of times. How far behind is that as a science? Do you think?
I think I think we should be careful about the difference between sort of talking in a sort of way to convert images.
Yes.
But if you think about it, behavioural science, depending on when you sort of say it started, you might say sort of Claude Hopkins, 1920s, sort of trying to do the people doing advertising then. You might move it further back, into economics and some of the stuff before that. But if you were to go to physics, you'd say, okay, when does physics start properly? It's probably Newton and his sort of, discovery of sort of laws of motions that allow you to make predictions like, planets.
Yep.
Chemistry, maybe you say, I think it's Poincare and elements, something like that. Medicine, maybe you'd say Jenner and vaccinations. And then if I ask you, okay, what's the equivalent for behavioural science? You'd look at me. Now, I've asked Claude this question, and he said, no, there isn't one. Come up with lots of different ones, but there isn't actually one.
Yes.
So I think that's the thing, is that at the moment, we don't have that like underlying set of principles that allow us to make predictions. Now, I think it's really important that I'm talking about sort of like general behavioural science, like let's say, to be sort of stereotypical, the behavioural science of the airport bookshop. There are some really incredibly thoughtful people in behavioural science really sort of pushing these sort of things forward. Cultural evolution I haven't come up with. Like that's, sort of, there's been lots of people pushing that forward. Joe Heinrich, Secrets of Our Success, fantastic book around like probably how humans build. So there's a lot of people out there who are really pushing forward the boundaries of behavioural science. However, I think alongside that, we have a lot of people talking about works that don't reproduce, were based on faulty or even fraudulent data that we still are sort of using within our decision-making structures.
Yeah. So if you roll out kind of 5 to 10 years from now, where do you see? I'm going to ask you 2 questions here, right? So first of all, where do you see electric twin, and where do you hope for it to be? And the second one is, how significant, how big an impact do you think AI is going to have more generally on society?
Obviously, I want to create a large company that sort of brings jobs to the UK, and there's a certain sort of competitiveness to I want to build a sort of an amazing company that really transforms how businesses do. But if I go back to that sort of time in COVID when we were making these really, really hard decisions, there's a sort of a famous quote from Don Cummings where he says that everyone thinks that, somewhere in government there is a door, and behind that door is the ninjas with the tools. That means they can actually solve all these problems. There is no door, there are no tools, there are no ninjas. And so going forward sort of 5-10 years, when a problem like COVID hits government, I would like there to be a door with electric twin written on it. I think that idea of being able to actually help in those really tough situations on these huge problems that affect so many people's lives, if you can have even a tiny impact, the impact on people is so huge.
Yes.
So I think that like for electric twin, this idea of being able to help, companies make better decisions, governments make better decisions, because for every company, the person, often these family-run business, they're making a bad decision is. That there's untold hardships all the time around bad decisions. So right decisions just make everything in the world better. So if we can do that, I think that's really impactful.
That's a hell of a legacy.
In terms of the general impact of AI, leaving aside the sort of, the discussion of, well, what happens when AI is smarter than us, the sort of super intelligence and stuff. Because to be honest with you, I'm just not an expert in that, and I don't really think about it. I think the answer to the impact of AI is going to be huge. I think it's going to transform our society in lots of different ways. I think there is a chance that if we manage to put together the right people, the right policies, help build the right companies, let's say in the UK, it'll have transformational success. We will be a richer, healthier, more vibrant country at the end of it. So I think there's a really, really positive story of AI. However, I think there's also, whenever you go through these transitions, there is also the chance that there is not that positive story. I think that if we don't build out our AI solutions, if government doesn't use AI, if we can't build the companies in the UK, we will have an aging population, we will have increasing unemployment, we will have people coming out of school, universities with no jobs to go into, and that will cause social strife. So I think, there is really, every sort of massive revolution, there are two paths, there are branching paths. And I think there is a chance that we can really get down that positive path. And I think there's loads of organizations like Looking for Growth, etc., who are pushing us towards, like, we have to go after this optimistic path because the shadowy path exists. I hope we get there, but I think unless we start really sort of pushing for it, really start making the changes necessary, I think what we will do is we will sort of just fall back into the old ways. Those old ways have failed many a time. I don't think I've lived in a country that's really grown as a job. I've never had a job, in an economy that's grown, right? So I do think that positive path exists, but I do think that involves lots of changes. Otherwise, we will see the same malaise. And I think as AI comes through, that malaise will get worse and it will lead to social strife. So that does concern me.
Having sat in the heart of that government and, now in the tech world and also in the scientific community as well, you've had a foot in three, probably the three major camps. I mean, if you're given a blank slate right now, what changes would you make to the country? You can do absolutely anything you want.
I'd probably just get a sane tax system. I think that, and then something to do with planning. I think that one of the lessons that I sort of learned in government, I think it's very easy in government to think that you're the hero, that you can come up with the solution. But actually the most impactful things government can do is laying the foundation so other people can. So it's not about what government necessarily does around AI. It's about government building the enabling conditions so great people within the UK can build great companies. Right? It's about, can they build the lab space? Can they have the lab space so they can build the great biotechnology and the life science companies? Can they get the energy so that they can run the data centers that allow them to invent the next generation of AI? Can we make sure we can get the right talent into the UK and that they have, when their wife is sick, they can get access to a GP so that person goes to work rather than worrying? I think it's all those sort of enabling factors that are so important for a vibrant country. So I think, although it's easy to sort of wave your magic wand around AI, to fixate on AI, actually a well-run country is the most important thing for AI.
How we invest is so important, isn't it? Because I don't know if you saw it. I saw it yesterday morning, which was about how the US has, I think it said 96% of its growth has come from AI and data over the course of the last 2 quarters, or maybe the last 12 months, actually. And so all of its growth across, it would have gone absolutely nowhere if it hadn't had the success across NVIDIA and OpenAI and the other businesses which are out there. And so it just tells you how important the investing in the right areas of our economy. And if I look at it historically in the UK, it feels like we've just underinvested in the clear areas where we've been winning and leading. Quite often we lead, but we tend not to invest as aggressively behind the things that we do well at. Would you agree with that, Will?
There are much more sensible people to debate industrial strategy and the benefits and the downsides of industrial strategy with. I think it's clear that there are some things that fundamentally the state can only do, and if the state does well, has a massive impact. Energy costs. If we'd invested in nuclear in 2010, 2015, we would be looking at a very different dynamic around our energy system right now. That would mean we'd be looking at a very different dynamic around AI data centers and, our ability to these large scale training. But I do think that there is lots of examples that people will bring out about governments successfully investing in areas. And people will rarely look at the ideas of when industrial strategies have hugely failed and not worked, which probably number much, much higher. A lot of the time, I think that, if you look at VCs are very good at making portfolio bets. The best VCs, often when you talk to them, they talk about investing in the person, not the idea. and all this type of factors. And so if those professionals who are, some of the most incentivized people in the UK or in the world to try and make these decisions can't quite get it right.
Yes.
I'm not sure government will ever be in the position to make it right.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think that although it's easy to say, we should be making these huge investments in different areas, and, I think there are arguments for it sometimes.
Yep.
I just think it's important that we don't think that this is an easy decision. And, everyone thought that sort of, if you look back over AI over the last 50 years, everyone had told you obviously what the future of AI looks like over the last 50 years. And everyone would have probably been wrong up to this point. Whether large language models do manage to scale to general intelligence or not. We could be sitting here in 5 years' time and, large language models, as sort of the transform models have topped out.
Yep. And
we'll be like, oh, obviously we should have been investing more in reinforcement learning when, the UK was leading, or, vice versa. So I do think that, the way I would say it is, I believe that AI will be hugely transformative to human behavior. So I have bet my career essentially, I'm fully committed.
Yes.
When people say we should obviously do stuff, but then they don't fully commit themselves, I would be hesitant. And I think that that's why I think around sort of industrial strategy, we have to be careful, because essentially what you're doing is you're asking people to make massive bets.
Yep.
And sometimes they don't pay off.
I guess it's when we're at a point where we know that there's a high levels of certainty, or higher levels of certainty. There's always risk attached, isn't there? But there's higher levels of certainty, and it's about whether we commit. Like you said, it's right now, are we committing enough?
Yeah, that's the thing as well. It's like the NHS. Do we think AI could help with the NHS? Obviously, we should be, we should be pouring money. I'm talking about these massive sort of, let's go GDP level bets.
Yes.
But the NHS we have already made that level of bet. So anything we can do. But the other side of it that we have to remember is, the NHS, they're still using fax machines and beepers.
Mad, isn't it?
Right. So we have this sort of real problem that I think it can be really important that we also recognize that what these organizations sometimes need is not necessarily the bleeding edge technology. They need technology that works. But then we should also jump them forward and use AI. It's a no-brainer. So especially around the NHS and some of this stuff, I think we can be very positive about what the current government's doing. I think that the AI Security Institute is probably the leading institute across the globe around, governments interacting with these companies to make sure that they're building them right, which we discussed earlier. I think, the stuff they've done, they've the support that, Keir Starmer, Morgan Sweeney, Pat McFadden gave around 10DS, the innovation fellowships, I think speaks really highly for them, because I think it's easy just to close down stuff that other people have done that's been successful, rather than they've doubled down, they've really tried to make the most of it. And there's lots of other areas where they've really doubled down on AI. So I think we can be complimentary of what they've done. The AI Opportunities Plan with Mike Clifford, another example, really good piece of work. But at the same time, we can say, come on, let's go double, let's go triple, let's go more than that. Yeah. So I think we can both be positive about what they've done and also demanding that they go much further.
Yes.
For the same reasons as we've described.
I wonder whether I'm just going back to those two worlds you described, which is this one of leading to a world of abundance and real massive impact, positive impact, whilst also having the risks. And I can't help but think that the problem is that they're going to coexist. We're going to have significant unemployment and challenges for new entrants into the job market, whilst also massively improving the living standards of certain echelons of the world. And it's really interesting that when I look at that, I can't help but think that we feel like the journeyman of our generation today, feel like the journeyman of actually getting to that place of abundance. You can see it. I see it all the time. The improvements in fusion and and battery technology and all of the different kind of foundational technologies which are required to have a huge impact on the cost of goods and services. Autonomous driving, all of it. They are coming. They're in the post. They're happening.
They're here.
Yes,
Autonomous
absolutely.
driving exists in San Francisco.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's here. It's arriving, and with it, if you take it, if you see the compounded effect, there can be no doubt that the cost of goods and services 10 to 15 years from now, 20 years from now, are going to come down massively. There's no doubt. It's just how bumpy that road is between now and then.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I would say it is I think you're right, and almost what you're saying is that as technology comes through, we're very difficult. We're not very good at developing societal solutions to that.
Yes.
When we have societal problems, we can often solve that with technology. But when we have technology, we often can't invent the sort of societal mechanisms, right? So if you look at the rise of these massive online platforms, YouTube, social media, how we should regulate them, Airbnb, Uber, we don't know how to regulate them. We're not really sure what to do. Right, that's a human behavior problem. I think the reason why electric twin is so important as we move through this this AI transition is actually how do we bring in policies, the right policies for these type of people. How do you build an experienced workforce in an age where a lot of the junior jobs are used by AI? How do we work out these different things? What does an equitable society look like? Actually, at the moment, we have no tools to do that. So it's basically just me and you chatting across the table. Whereas actually what we would want to do is start being able to build out in a sort of the same way that we would think about, if we were trying to build a nuclear power plant, we would build a digital twin of that power plant. We'd start being able to simulate, we'd see what would happen.
Yeah.
That's what we actually need to be able to get to if we're going to solve these sort of societal problems.
Yes.
At the moment, we don't. So every time a societal problem comes, we just really struggle to deal with it.
I mean, look, I'm a tech optimist, there's no doubt, but I feel an absolute responsibility to wave the flag. And I've told you, I think probably this will be the third time I've told you about, when we, first developed our most, properly autonomous kind of infrastructure at Super Ridge. And that moment in time, you go, wow, that's amazing. We've hit gold here. That's the future. And then you go, but, that's just incredibly, it's just kind of too powerful, and so you've got to wave the flag. And that's why I've loved today, and I really appreciate you taking the time and being so open about talking about the insights you've got in government. And I think it's really important to shine a light on the amazing work and your sense of gratitude and appreciation for the effort, energy and purpose of so many people that do work in government, because it's so easy to slag them off and to point the finger at them. The systemic issue of the system, the 19th century, I think you're right to tell me I'm well too modern. That's well too modern for it. Operating system of governments, the paper state is a real kind of, it's just such a significant challenge in order to adapt to the today's world. And I can't help but think, though, if they get it right, like we were saying before, AI does have the ability to circumvent bureaucratic traditional operating systems. It can provide a new one. But it's leaning into this point, which is, although I'm optimistic, incredibly optimistic, and I really believe it will raise living standards for everyone globally. No doubt about that over time. But there is this kind of making sure that you've summed it up brilliantly, which is having a kind of a societal kind of parachute, a view on it. What can we do to ensure that it has the most positive impact throughout the process of change?
Exactly. I mean, it's, what we saw in COVID is that because of the levers of the state, we could only bring in broad policies like lockdown.
Yeah.
They mitigated some harms but caused other harms. And there was no way for us to look at those harms and try and mitigate them. Actually, with AI, we will see, great wealth produced in some ways, and that will cause harms in others. And we need to find ways that we can mitigate those harms. And actually, I think that AI can help us do that. I think that, if you have this extra powerful tool in your toolkit, you are able to, start building out those more complex policy reactions that actually allows us to make sure that we try and build this really positive society for everyone in a way that doesn't end us with this sort of the haves and the have-nots.
Well, look, it's great talking to you about it. I mean, I think the things that come to light for me is just how, from you looking from the inside out rather than outside in, is this recognition of just how complex the problems are that you're trying to solve. So you've mentioned about the scale of some of these problems. So modeling this is not like doing it for a company. It's massively, much larger problems, larger scale, more implications. It's great to hear that, you've got real confidence in so many of the people and their purpose in government, which is great. It's just to hear, and I can't imagine. In many ways, it's a thankless task for many people, that come into those roles, because there's obviously the people which we see in the press, but there's so many other civil servants which are in there battling hard against that treacle through the mud on a day-to-day basis to try and do the right thing. So it's really interesting. And I think it's just a really fascinating time to just put a lens over the government, but also over industry over this period of time. It's just going to be, I think it's going to be bananas over the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, really exciting. Drug discoveries and, all of the kind of improved products and services which will help, whether that's health or standard of living, kind of access to different medication, all these sorts of things. It's just, I think there's definitely can't be a more exciting time to have lived in, I think. What do you think?
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
I think that, there has been, we are lucky enough that so far society has always gotten better. Our lives today are, far beyond, even the poorest person today is probably richer than anyone in the 1700s in terms of their lifestyle, their ability to get access medical care, etc. I think that has every opportunity to continue, but we shouldn't overestimate that AI is probably the most powerful tool we've ever had, and that does bring with it risks. I think it could lead to very serious strife. It could lead to big problems unless we're aware of it and also using AI to make sure that doesn't happen. Yeah. Because actually, I think that one of the things that's interesting about sort of, if you think about the use of data in government, is that in some ways, data in government, they've, has always been held back because of concerns around privacy, rightly, it's important we use data in rightly, data sharing, all these sort of frictions that government has. But if you look at Google has said, people give us your data and we'll give you valid service. And everyone said, okay, fine, let's do it. And so, Google gives services which most people are very happy with, use every day. Yes. And they're demanding them from government now. And so I think that that's a story of, I think that it's really important that we build right, but it's really important that we build.
You actually just made me think about the kind of new digital ID that's just come out. Yeah. Which in itself is really interesting, isn't it? That's going to cause some chaos.
Digital ID is a fascinating one because in some ways, if you just say, do you want to a single sign-on to government platforms, I would say yes, instantly. Yes. Please God. I can't find anything. To be honest, because at this point, when I have to register with anything, I might as well just click I can't remember my password. Like, you don't even need a login. Just send me, I'll just go through the period of getting a new issued thing. So obviously, I'm very happy with the idea of having a single sign-on for government. And when you think about what a single login is, it's essentially a digital ID. And so I think that, sometimes if I had to give some advice to government, it would just be like, just do single login for everyone who wants it, which is loads of people who would be delighted. That allows you to build out the tech stack, build out all the stuff that is necessary, because it's a complicated project. You can roll it out, you can develop it, you can make sure it works across. And then at the point it works, you can say to people, actually, we should use it in these areas for these reasons. And then people are like, well, to be honest with you, it already works and it's useful. Say, for instance, like we all stand there at self-checkouts now, frantically trying to wave for somebody to give you paracetamol or whatever else is at 16. Or, I'm old enough now that they don't even check my ID when I want a beer. But if I just had a thing on my phone that I could be like, beep, I'm 18, I'd be like, that sounds great. I will do that because it really annoys me standing at checkout. And so there's all these ways that government could bring it in just by reducing friction, proving the use to people before you try and do this sort of the massive, the other side of it. And so I think that the digital ID, it's just a way, it's sort of like a traditional way of thinking about policy rather than thinking of it as sort of like a product development. What's the MVP? How can we get those initial customers who can test and learn with us and then slow and build it out? And I think that that's probably the way that government has to start thinking rather than these big policy announcements. Actually, how do we build an MVP? How do we develop it up? How do we make people love it and then show value? And then you would see, I think, a lot of people, a lot of the fears are how government might implement it. But if you actually already understand how it's been implemented, there is no mystery for people, and people can choose.
Yeah. Do you think it's actually going to be any more invasive than a Google single sign-on? Because they've got your data anyway. You're in control of it. It is a digital ID, isn't it? Your Google sign-in.
So I'm very, very positive around sort of government having better understanding of who people are. I think that so often when people find themselves in times of trouble, there are actually programs in place in government to try and help them out of that trouble. But that person isn't aware of them, or they can't access them, or they don't access them in time. They get into worse trouble. And then that continues until we sort of have to lift them out of the sort of, right from the bottom. And that's really expensive, really hard, and often doesn't work. So if you can intervene quickly and help people out, get them the help they need, help them, like when somebody sort of falls out of work, obviously when you're just out of work, you're much easier to get back into work than somebody who's been out of work for a long time.
Yeah.
So I'm really positive around this idea of, government being able to sort of, almost like, let's say, push government over sort of somebody has to pull on government programs. Government can push the help they need into people. So I'm really pro that style of government. But that style of government is saying it doesn't necessarily need to, that style of government needs to exist first before you worry about like the invasiveness, the sort of collecting IDs, etc. Because just collecting IDs has no value to me.
No.
I don't care. Like, or what you're saying to somebody is, I want to collect your ID. And I say, why? And you say, because we could do this stuff. Google says, I want your login. I say, why? Because I'll give you free email. I'm like, great. Then Google says, do you want to sign into this random site and forget a password? Or do you want to use your Google ID? Google ID.
Yes.
Right? So Google is always giving me value. And that's why I think the government, they just need like this idea of fixating on what the value is. Why are we building it? And slowly, and that's why I do it, because I think it's a really impactful program and it's a really important thing that we need to be able to do, but we need to be able to do it with the trust of people rather than government saying, trust us. They should prove that trust out along the way and build that trust and build that value with people. And then I think people would be much happier with it as a concept.
100%. Yeah. Look, the two things on that, isn't there? The first one is, if you look at, I think it's Estonia, isn't it? Which has got this kind of full digital government. The whole thing is completely digitalized. They started it maybe 10, 15 years ago. I think actually the local population there, the Estonians are actually really proud of it. They're actually,
Estonia's fantastic. Their digital government's really good.
Yeah.
I do think we should always recognise, though, that I think Estonia's smaller than London. So, there are scaling things. There are, different sort of cultures and, what people, think is okay for government.
Yes.
I think also that ID system has had problems where they've had to redo some of the IDs. So, I think that with these sort of digital government initiatives across the board, I think it's really important that we're always looking to build them better, but we're not necessarily saying this is the perfect solution. Oh, we obviously know what the perfect solution is, because we don't. Everyone who's tried to build a tech product knows exactly what they should buy, and then they've met the customer, they've met the problem, realised,
it's a different thing.
It's a different thing. And so I think that what we need to do is help government. I think government needs to fixate on is how can it build stuff in a way that reflects that sort of agile modern development process that is actually how every modern company works, rather than the sort of, we're going to try and land something that works with people.
Yeah, so you've got this like the Estonia prototype, like you say. So there's some examples of it working.
India's got a fantastic. Everyone speaks very highly of India and their recent work around this as well. I haven't looked into it, but I think there's lots of cracking examples. Yeah. It is important to remember, of course, the UK is one of those really highly thought of examples.
Yes.
Like gov.uk is a cracking example of really good technology for communicating. Yes. So I think one of the problems we have in government at the moment often is that we talk as though we're behind, that we're not winning, that our teams are, struggling. Whereas, if you go to a football match and one side side's up 1-0, it's not the side that's down that's crowd is singing and chanting.
Yeah.
So if we want to recruit great people into government, I think we do need to talk more positively about our success, their ambition, the vision, some of these things about changing lives, rather than quite often the technocratic, boring language.
Yeah, getting sucked into it. Yeah, the other thing that comes to mind is it's absolutely needed. I don't know if you saw it, but there was some stat that I read the other day where there was something like 100,000 companies created illegally on Companies House, like just through the lack of just how easy that was and the fact that you didn't need any kind of digital. I think that's led to the more recent kind of, there's a director's kind of KYC digital process now that everyone's filling out. I'm assuming that's a response to the challenges of these kind of ghost entities that were set up. But I think that's just a small window into what's to come with autonomous systems and malign actors and all this sort of stuff. And I can't help but think that one of the roles of social media and governments and loads of different and large corporates actually is to be able to present platforms or technology which protects human kind of humanity, human connection, authenticity. We're already in a place, right? You're simulating the statistical world, but what we're also seeing right now is people being able to indistinguishable kind of deep fakes and other AI, which combined with all these other technologies poses a huge threat.
Yeah, it does. And we should bear in mind that people have been able to lie in quotes in newspapers since newspapers started.
Yeah.
And also we've had the ability to fake very accurately for ages, right? Avatar's pretty good.
Yes.
And so obviously there's you suddenly allow somebody with a desktop computer to be able to do it rather than one of the leading special effects studios in the world.
Yeah.
But in that, I think that I think we will see different ways of how trust is conferred, what we trust, how we trust it, and that is a really interesting thing. I think that at the moment you're seeing I think you're seeing the rise of the trusted Substacker. Don't know what the right word for that. I think that's probably a more catchy term than trusted.
Yeah.
Those people are writing very long form articles, very thoughtfully about lots of issues, way deeper and more than your sort of classic newspaper. Yeah. So in some ways, what we're seeing is actually the rise of really good journalism.
Absolutely.
Long form podcasts, I think, are really good. I actually think that having politicians for being able to converse for 2 hours makes it much easier for the public to understand them and their intentions than them having to be able to do 30-second sign bites on a debate stage. Yep. So I think there's lots of things where the sort of our old ways of conferring trust and what we see of trust is changing, mainly because at one point we only had 4 channels actually. I was alive when Channel 5 came in. Only a few newspapers, so you could regulate them, right? So you could sort of force, but now you don't. We have thousands of millions of channels. And so how do people convert trust, what they trust? I think we're going to see that change hugely. And I think it's one of the most exciting for me, a really exciting thing to see develop. I think the downside of it is it's a huge experiment to be running on one of the most important things of humanity. We're starting to seeing, more and more people are in sort of like these large WhatsApp groups where people are talking, etc. So we're already seeing people find different ways of interacting within that world, different ways of changing. So I think, we will find new ways of finding what trust looks like. We will also have people lie about deepfakes. I bet you if you go back, and there probably hasn't been a deepfake that's affected a political election yet, but there has been a politician who's claimed something is a deepfake. And so, there will always be these trade-offs. And I think how we deal with them, what we do, how we cope with that, I think is going to be really interesting. And then how do we help companies, etc., build those systems into their products. Like I actually think community notes in X is a really good example of a slightly different way of thinking about moderation. Often it's very effective. Why? Because it's funny, it's clever, it's to the point.
Yep.
You know, a way that like, you know, right under it. And I think that's a very clever way of dealing with some of the sort of these problems.
Yes.
It's open source, you know, so it's obviously there's obviously a debate around, you know, X and social media platforms, but those type of us building out those type of technologies, thinking about how we explore that way of thinking. Yeah. Wikipedia is a really good example of that, right? Everyone, you know, in some ways it is, you know, not perfect, but it's probably better than anything we've had before.
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah, there's some really interesting stuff. But then you have sort of like the rise of sort of like AI summaries at the top of Google, how that changes things. You know, when was the last time I clicked on an article on Google? Well, to be honest with you, I just use ChatGPT and Claude to look everything up now.
I know. Yeah,
it's really bad because everyone says, you know, you always see these polls, 90, you know, sort of 35% of people don't reference. And I'm like, I'm definitely in that 35%. Definitely.
There we're into that thing, which is that, you know, an answer and moving forward is better than no answer and not moving forward. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, we move forward, we make mistakes and we fail and we move, but the action, first of all, it removes anxiety and stress, but also it's actually how you progress, right? And if you're heading in generally the right direction, a lot of the time, you progress well.
Yeah, and, you know, like most of the time in my life, I've never sort of gone either, you know, well, maybe when I was an academic, I'd look up in scientific papers, but, you know, you're not going to an encyclopedia all the time. Probably your mates told you something.
Yes.
And then you've repeated it to somebody else. I mean, I'm not sure what's more, you know, when people talk about, oh, what happens if an LLM hallucinates or, you know, ChatGPT hallucinates? I'm like, well,
try my mates.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's always sort of, you know, hallucinating, we misremember stuff all the time. I've probably said some stupid stuff already today where I've misremembered it or quoted the wrong name or something. And then, you know, and so I think that, you know, I think that's the other thing of this is that sometimes we, in justifiable worries of new technologies, we somehow give prominence to old ways of doing it, which have exactly the same problems. We're just sort of okay with that. Yeah. We're okay with the idea that, we'll believe that person who has some credentials.
Yes, it's funny, isn't it? You know, we're so savage with our criticism of the inaccuracy of technology, but so kind of compassionate or probably negligent of our ability to listen or believe something we read in the Sun, in a random newspaper or whatever. And so it's kind of, you're right, there is a complete, you know, dichotomy there of.
And, you know, if you look back over the early, especially the early part of COVID, between, you know, what was being broadcast in traditional media and what was being, the thoughtful people were saying on social media, I'm almost certain the social media people would have been better. They wrote some of the more thoughtful stuff. Now, I have had to add the caveat thoughtful there because there is the other side.
Yes.
But I do think it's really important that actually we do recognise that actually sometimes this, by allowing this sort of wisdom of the crowds, we actually allow a much more diverse range of views and diverse range of ideas that actually might mean that we get to better places by letting through, you know, whenever you constrict, you're taking out the extremes at both sides. And I actually think that could be a real positive, that people actually suddenly, like we were talking earlier about those long Substack articles on planning, etc. They exist because of this diversification of channels.
Yes.
And so if you know, as you try and get rid of the stuff at one end, you're probably going to harm the other stuff at the other end.
Well, we're providing we're providing the infrastructure for people to build out their own view of trust and authenticity in a kind of multi-dimensional way. Like I say, you can read a Substack, you can then, you know, listen to a podcast actually, and then you're able to build a much more informed decision as to whether you've got a level of...
Could be informed.
Yeah.
It depends, you know, that's the thing, right? Is that I 100% agree with you.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it's about your intuition of what you read. Now, that's probably also true, has always been true, right? It's that actually, I think, you know, when they've looked into news channels aren't biased on how they report, it's what they report. Because they report what people care about.
Yep.
And I think this is the other side of things when we think about how we build trust into to newspapers and our institutions. We have to be very careful that we don't put increasingly high friction on them, because that means that they become effectively slower, less interesting. So people have agency.
Yeah.
So they can go off and read whatever they want. So actually that means that less people are reading trusted sources. Whereas actually if you allow those sort of institutions to broaden out, to explore, different ways of reporting, etc., we have more people reading more trusted institute or sources, even though those sources might be slightly less trustworthy than they were. Because what do you want reporting? Do you want people to be able to go to the BBC to get live news? Or do you want the BBC to say, we're going to wait an hour to verify it, but that means I'm going to somewhere else and I'm just reading whatever, person on social media. So I think there's all these trade-offs, incentives and stuff. And again, it comes back to this idea of actually what we're discussing is sort of like a social problem. How can we get the most trusted information to the most people in a way that actually people read it? Because this is the other thing. I think too often at the moment, our conversation is around the supply of this stuff, not the demand. Because if their demand is for a certain product, that's what they're going to get.
Yeah.
And, there's no way. And so actually it's about how do we try and make sure that the demand is for, high quality stuff.
I can't help but think, though, when you come back to that digital ID concept and the fact that, we're going to have this overwhelming amount of content and avatars and, personalities, which are all going to be, artificial. And so what's going to happen is there's going to be a lens put over the, authentication piece. And so with that, I just feel like that if you take a longer term view, it just we're leaning into a place where that authentication trust, multiple new channels coming up, traditional channels are dying. It all to me leans into empowering the end user, the customer, the public to have better access, better visibility, more control over how they're influenced. And I got a buddy, I sat down the other day, I couldn't believe actually, he's a property developer from Leeds and very practical guy, very successful guy. And I knew that he was listening to a few different influencers, a few different kind of politicians, different people. And then I actually kind of dug into this conversation with him about, well, who are all the people? Who are all the people you really listen to? And I couldn't believe the scope and the breadth. He had like some correspondents in Russia that he listened to, some in Gaza, some on both sides of all the arguments. He really built out this, and he's a property developer in Leeds. He's not coming from a kind of academic. He's not a guy that would read hundreds of books or anything like that. But he's bright and smart. Don't get me wrong, incredibly busy. But the way that he has set up his environment to get a balanced or try to gain a balanced view of the things that are important to him in the world is really remarkable. It's really interesting to see it happen.
I think I fall for this all the time. Sometimes when we're talking about this, and I might have even made this mistake in this conversation so far, we talk about the people most affected by this as though they're the disaffected from government, that they're like the hard to reach. Like in our minds, that's the people most affected by this. Yeah. Actually, it could be the highly engaged, and they have the least, diverse range of sources. If you're just reading the BBC, that's probably, I think the BBC is probably a good example if you're going to read one. Yeah. But there's going to be lots of people who read only one source that they feel is high quality, but actually has a significant bias to it. And so actually what it might be is that actually the people who suffer most within this sort of highly distributed, fragmented environment is not the disaffected or the people we conventionally think of. It's actually the highly engaged people who are engaged with government who we think are safe, because somehow I think I'm safe from this problem, even though I can tell you exactly why I'm not.
Yes.
And so, does that worry me? Not really, actually. I'm sort of, I'm sort of okay with the sort of information diet that I have. I probably should look to improve it in different ways. I think the interesting thing is that probably because of the way I read, interact, talk to people, I'm probably more culturally similar to somebody from Silicon Valley, to say, for instance, the sort of property developer from Leeds and that we mentioned. And I think that's probably bad when we start thinking about like how we think about the UK and how we build the UK, that if I'm part of this sort of like global sort of community, and they're part, of a local community. And I think that is something that we have to think about as people sort of find these, they start being part of different cultures that don't necessarily align to, the state. And then, well, how do we help people to, think of the state and the importance of, making sure we have this vibrant and important, healthy country.
It's so important, isn't it? Broadening that lens wider than your current circle is so important, because, and I think about that regularly with flying the flag of AI. I do think about, new job entrants. Weirdly, that I think we're going to be in this weird situation, right, where there's going to be this procrastination over the next 5 years, where actually maybe new entrants entering into the job market might find it tough as we go through this AI transformation period. But then it's going to be these AI wielding youngsters, which are so AI native, that will actually become highly valuable at some point. Does that make sense? Where they're able to operate at such lightning speed compared to...
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think that's probably a positive way of looking at it.
Yes.
I think that, I don't think we know the answer.
No, we don't know.
I think that, and it's an interesting one, right? When you think of what is probably the biggest looming question that the government faces, like, what does the future of the job market look like in 5 years? How many people do you think are looking at it in government right now? How many people are thinking about it? Is this a sort of looming tide in the same scale as COVID? I think you could make an argument.
Yes.
Will we start planning for it, bringing in sort of tools, the right, going after it like we did with the vaccine task force over the next couple of years to deal with it? No.
I want to tap into that point you raised there. You said how many people will be looking at it? And you've got a better window into that. I don't actually know. But do you imagine that that's probably not... I mean, look, it's not been elevated at the same way that AI has been elevated.
I would be willing to make a bet
that
there are 0 people
yeah.
that have technical expertise working on that problem in Treasury right now. There might be a generalist who's reading some papers, or it sort of is covered.
Yeah. No one's working that out.
I wouldn't be surprised.
So
it wouldn't I'm betting on it, right?
Yeah.
They might have employed some consultants to look at it.
Yeah.
But like this idea that, you have this sort of, it goes back to this idea, I said earlier, everyone likes to think there is a door.
Yes.
With the tours, with the ninjas. And then I say to you, I'll bet on you 0. And you're like, it can't be. You just thought.
No door.
There is,
ninjas.
in HMT, there is a door with AI written on it with the ninjas, with the tools.
Fuck.
There is no door. Man. There is no door.
I mean, I'm flying the flag. Do you know what I mean? I'm going, hey guys, look, and I'm just trying to share it with people. Yeah. For anyone that watches this, whether it's 60,000 or 1,600, whatever, we have a viewership that goes up and down. But the point being that I'm just going to keep flying it, because people need to know about it. People need to be prepared for it. People need to think about it, whether that's inside government. And even down to, I'm going to ask you one other question which relates to that in a second, actually.
I think on this point of government, I do think it's important people do acknowledge it in government.
Yeah.
People are aware of it, like the fact that, they got Matt Clifford in to do this AI opportunities plan does not, they're not, we shouldn't pretend that they are blind or they're just stupid. However, bringing the system, it's like a slow moving boat, turning that system around, getting it aligned, getting actually like the funding. Like, it's much easier to just carry on funding the same, we've just gone through a spending review process where the budgets are set. It is much easier to say, okay, just continue all your programs, rather than saying, okay, you need to cut heavily in all these different programs so we can free up this space so that we can explore bringing all this money and this capital investment into AI.
Yep.
So, that's the problem, right? Is that when it comes down to these sort of hard decisions, that's where it really tells. Like, have we made we have to make choices. There is not unlimited resources.
Yep.
And the choices that we have to make are hard, because they mean government saying we will do less because of the fact that in 5 years' time, this AI wave's coming. Yeah. And those hard choices are hard to persuade government to do. It's hard to persuade government to make the right choices in COVID, even though there you could see, everyone in the country could see that line creeping up. Everyone could, you'd see your friends going down COVID. You could see that line creeping up, but even then it's hard to make those choices because they are hard.
I want to come back to actually something different. I was going to go in one direction. I'll go in a different one, which is Rachel Reeves. Obviously, they've made a commitment to not borrowing beyond their means. Spend today to pay tomorrow, right? But actually, is this possibly the worst ever time to have made that decision? And I hadn't thought about it in that respect, actually, weirdly, until you just said something. But if you were to invest in anything right now, anything in the last 10 or 15 or 20 years, which you felt you needed to get ahead of, it would have to be this point in time. And I just wonder whether that kind of retrospective look on something needs to change, really.
So, I think that bond markets are something I don't understand. I don't think anyone truly understands it, it seems. From reasons going on, I'm not sure how many people understand it even within girls. Anyway, but we are spending a huge amount of money on interest and debt repayments, right? So actually being conscious of that cost is important. I think what's crazy is that we are making decisions based on the OBR isn't even making forecasts because they're not allowed to say, well, that's never going to happen. So what we have this sort of Potemkin-like situation where Rachel Reeves is saying, I'm going to stay within the boundaries made by the OBR that doesn't even believe it's a forecast. With, we like pull forward spending for the first 2 years and then it goes off a cliff and that makes it work within the envelope. So it's not like financial modeling as we all would want it to be.
Yeah.
And it's not just, well, let's invest in the future as some of us, you could make an argument for. So to me, the whole sort of, do we break financial rules or should we not financial rules, etc., is like, what are we doing here? It's not even a forecast. It doesn't make sense. It's just like, VAT receipts were wrong in HMRC. Suddenly she's got an extra 3 billion to spend.
Yeah.
Like, if those 3 billion could just appear like that, what are we worrying about this 10 billion? I think the other thing is that, there's lots of people spend so much time talking about these like 10 bill hedge rooms. How much do we spend in government? I don't know. It's hundreds of billions, if not.
That's a very small margin.
It must be close to $1 trillion because I think we spend a huge amount of money on debt every year. So we're just sort of like we're having these discussions around this tiny, random line that we've all decided on, and we should be talking about, okay, what are we doing with the big bulk? Like, where are we? What's our big investments?
The joke is, you'd actually say if you're only 10 billion out at the end of this, you've done well, Rachel.
Yeah. And it's just like
that margin of error. Yeah.
Exactly. It's sort of like it just feels to me that it's a sort of, it's just bizarre. And I say that as somebody who really doesn't. I never really worked around the economy, around the economic modelling. Yeah. It just strikes me as bizarre, like a crazy process that that's never right. Like, have the OBR focus? I mean, what they're trying. I don't think they're trying to make forecasts, but have their scenarios ever been true? Because if they have never really been right, why are we trying to get within 10 bill of them? Now, if the answer is we're trying to make sure that the bond markets are, see the UK as a positive thing, that we're not going to debulk, etc., I think there's a strong argument for, okay, well, what do we need to do there? Because if the answer is actually they will pay for if we're putting this money into nuclear power stations, if we're putting it into data centers, if we're putting it into building airports, if we're doing things that will return investment, well, let's go do that and do loads of it. Yes. Go build, go show the sort of the ambitious vision of the UK, and then everything else will follow behind that.
It feels absolutely like you say that it's a slightly like the blind leading the blind in that area a little bit, and I wonder whether there's just a bit more time, that a bit more investment. I guess the point is actually it's not necessarily blind leading the blind. It feels like it's a bit of kind of almost smoke and mirrors, that they're using one example which is not highly trusted in order to set a precedent for the other, I
think we should be careful,
incorrect.
Right? Again, it's this idea of there is a certain construction that existed before they came in.
Yeah.
Labour are therefore, within their manifesto promises, they have chosen to say that they will obey the OBR. That, we've been talking about how the government can't break. We need to deliver on their promises. Well, if the promise of the UK population is they are going to stick to these rules, well, then actually holding politicians to account is difficult. But Actually, I think it just comes back to the idea. We're again just talking about the fact that we don't have this ability to predict the future. We don't really know how behavior works. We don't really know how the bond market works. And so, your point of it's sort of like smoke and mirrors, it's string, but that's because we don't have the better tools. In the end, what we're doing is, even on these huge decisions, again, it's, we're asking Rachel Reeves to make an impossible decision because she doesn't have the tools, probably doesn't have the right information. She's probably looking at these massive spreadsheets that Treasury have produced, all with sort of lines in them with the different cap stack. And they're like, what do you want to cut out? There's 200 lines on there. And she's like, well, what's this 3 billion around flood defenses in...
Is that how it'll be operating?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised, right? It's just really hard. I mean, how can you build an organization that can bring all that information into a single process like that? It's just really difficult.
It's really difficult, but you would hope to think that by the time that had got to Rachel Reeves, that she wouldn't be sat there looking at a spreadsheet. Does that make sense? I think
the problem is what we've done is in government, because of the way that it's reported, because of the way that we've sort of lost our trust in almost in civil servants, right? We massively confine them, like we're with like procurement rules and all these other rules, legal frameworks, etc. The only people who now can unlock the system are essentially the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. Yep. So almost everything has to flow through them. And they can only make so many decisions a day. They can only get so much information. Yep. And therefore, when it comes to like these massive decisions across the whole of government, there isn't it's a bit like, there's always this idea that our brain is sort of like somewhere in our brain is like, like a little person with the controls, right? Because we'd like to think that it all comes together at a certain point. But in that little person with the controls, there's another little brain. And then, it just keeps going back. And that's sort of like that cartoon. I think it was a Beano cartoon with it, sort of like that. And government's basically the same, but we do know the name of the people, the little brain at the top, right? It's the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. So the only information they can only take in so much information. They can only read so many notes. They can only, so that is effectively a bottleneck. And it's not due to them. It's just the way that we have now constructed the system is just so much has to go through them.
But that isn't that result of what I was talking about before, which is this kind of tension that's being put across these traditional structures. And all they're really doing is just pushing the decision making up further and further as it becomes more, the straitjacket gets tighter. They just go, oh, well, but you not make that decision. We'll push it up again and we'll push it back up until everything
and that's what
at the top.
That's what we've effectively created.
Yeah.
But I think some of those people would want to make the decisions. If we could help them give them the agency, give them the empowerment, I think that they would try and make the right decision. They would try and push things out. It's like most businesses are always trying to decentralize, right? They're trying to decentralize their decision making, trying to make the decision making to the person who has the most information closest to the sort of coalface.
Yeah.
But the way that sort of government's constructed, because of the way the sort of democracies works, we do elect ministers. We do elect, certain people who are political leaders who we want to make certain decisions because it's a democracy. And so that has like some weird implications around these type of things. So I do think, and then that's why I think it's always important to talk about the good people in the civil service, because actually, if your argument is the civil service is not functioning, we need to give more trust to people and decentralize and empower these people. It comes across as odd.
Yes.
So I think it's really important that we talk about these really good people who we can empower and enable to actually do a better job if we free them from the constraints of having to get sign off from number 10 every single time.
Yeah. Were you given that a higher degree of autonomy with 10DS, would you say, than other departments?
I think at the time I was in government was unique because of COVID.
Yes.
In some ways, we did have greater autonomy. In some ways, we just had that greater autonomy because, to be honest with you, we didn't know we weren't meant to have that autonomy, right? In some ways, there's the old average of you train a flea by, you put a flea in a jam jar and then you get it jumping and it just keeps hitting the jam jar. And then over a certain amount of time, it just knows it's going to hit the jam jar, so it jumps a bit lower, so you can take the lid off and it never jumps out.
Okay.
And I think that sometimes, we take these really good people and then we put them and they jump, and they jump for years. And then finally they're just like, I can't jump higher.
Yeah.
Whereas I just turn up and I'm like, let's go.
Yes.
And I was lucky enough to recruit people similarly. And then also the other interesting thing is by just, working alongside like people who feel slightly more unconstrained, civil servants do it, and so it has this rippling effect.
Yes.
And I think, so I think sometimes we are too pessimistic around how quickly the culture of the civil service could change. But I think that we shouldn't go in thinking that it isn't a massive task that requires a large number of people who are very good to, take on a huge amount of, lose out on a huge amount of things. And the other side of things is it's horrible when you get attacked in the press. Like, some of these guys, you'll see the people who go in, like, probably Kate Bingham, I bet she got slandered in the press many times when she was doing the vaccine task force. It was a success at the end, so people probably stopped. Yeah. But, Matt Clifford, I know there's some articles written against him. It's very tough for these people, these very successful people. They go in, they give up their time, efforts, and then there were articles when I was in government about Patrick Vallance and how his shares vested at different times.
Yeah.
Great. We've got a guy who's so good that, and then we believe in this idea of, he's thinking about the long-term success of the company, and so they pay out at different things. That's good. And yet we use it to sort of slander him and say that, it's a conflict of interest, rather than saying it's amazing that we have somebody who's so good. They've run that, they've been at that top level, and now they're working in government. I think that's fantastic. And I think that's the other side of it that's very hard.
We see that in sport, don't we, where they just pile into our most successful sports people the moment they slip up, and they just scavenge on it. And it's just, they say that that's a bigger UK problem than anywhere else. Like, it's where the kings of jumping on the backs of people. It's like we want people to fail in many ways, which is a real shame. And that's what I was talking about earlier, when I was talking about all those people which maybe made some smallish mistakes in the grand scheme of it, but are they making that because of the pressure? Do you know what I mean? Like, I can only imagine that you kind of seek, I don't know, different things, space or relaxation or a change or solace in some capacity when you're under such extreme. I mean, because people must be very aware of the impact of the decisions they're making, right?
Well, I think, if you look at sort of UK culture, this is the point of view of like chopping down successful people. That's the idea of, do we suffer from that?
Yeah.
I think it's probably true. And I think that we have to sort of think about ways that we can celebrate people's success, keep the most successful entrepreneurs in this country, because they actually mentor the next generation and provide capital. But I think mentorship's crucially important, just having been gone through it. But the other side of it, sort of like, I think, that's almost the pessimistic view. But the other side of it is we should remember that the other part of British culture is the culture that allows us to invent all these different things, to be, DeepMind is a world-leading success, and it exists in Britain, right? So British culture is a part of that success. So I think the way I look at it is, yes, we have to find a way through this sort of the how we deal with this sort of, as you say, the sort of cutting down the sort of tall potty syndrome. But then we should also celebrate the fact that actually, if we manage to do that successfully, we probably might have the best culture for the next part of the journey, So, in some ways, I think that we rightly worry about the culture of the UK, but we sometimes forget to celebrate the culture of the UK that has created DeepMind, creates some of the top universities in the world. So I think that, when we're again to this sort of optimistic versus pessimistic side, in talking about the tall potty syndrome of the UK, we're sort of tall poppy syndroming the UK at the same time. So I think it's, this debate is more complicated, but I do think we just need to celebrate the successes of the UK more.
The worst case scenario there, right, of what the hypothesis you've just given, is the fact that we've got this incredible talent which we suppress.
Yeah.
Or
moves to the US.
Yeah. But that's effectively the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
That we're incredibly talented, and despite us suppressing people, we still manage to do great things. And I think that's likely. I think that because it's mad, isn't it? You look at look at the F1 yesterday. I didn't actually see the top 10, but normally you look at the top 10 drivers in the F1, and 40% of them will be British.
Or at least the manufacturers will definitely be based in Britain.
Absolutely. It's incredible. There's loads of sports and not just sports.
Premier League, most successful league in the world.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So and actually, if you look at that, you see the amount of international investment that we attract into our British sport.
Yeah, exactly. And do we celebrate the success of that enough? Probably not.
No, it's actually a problem. Everyone's sitting there going, "Oh bloody hell! Why have we got so many US owners?" Well, do you know what? Because at least they can pile the money into keeping the Premier League as the most exciting league in the world. Yeah, but it's interesting, isn't it? It's just comes back to that nuance, which is, I look at it through that lens, this, as you do, which is just incredible talent. But are we really set up to make the most of it? And maybe, having spent time with you today, it's been brilliant to get a really sound understanding or better understanding of just how complex a challenge that is. That people try. I like the flea analogy. I have a monkey one. It was very similar.
It was actually told by a priest when I was at school.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely the monkey one I have is where if a monkey goes into a cage, sees a banana, pulls a banana, water comes down, tries a few times, gets wet, avoids it. A second monkey comes in, tries it, gets wet, tries it again.
Yeah.
Third monkey comes in, sees the other monkey is sat down, just goes, "Oh fuck it, I'll sit down."
Yeah.
Doesn't even bother trying, sits down with everyone else, and so that kind of behavioural issue.
Well, funny, I've just realised I should probably check how flea training's done, because the priest told me it, so I've always assumed it's true. I've never checked to see if the flea training story is told. I've told so many people. It's probably, there's loads of people out there thinking they can train a flea, because I got told this by a priest when I was 8 years old.
To be honest with you, this is a great example of why you should trust LLMs.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the worst of it. I was thinking I'm going to use Claude after that. So now we've got... we don't know what's true anymore. Actually, what I need to go is get a flea. Where am I going to find a flea from? Imagine just going up to sort of somebody and, "Excuse me, your dog, any fleas I could borrow?" Why? Well, I've got a jam jar.
I've got a jam jar, yeah. I'll try the 3 monkeys one. You try the fleas.
I think mine's a little bit easier than the 3 monkeys one.
So good. Great to spend time with you. Thank you for taking the time out.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Really great. And I'm excited to really, track the journey at Electric Twin. If anyone wants to get hold of you,
electrictwin.com, or just email me at ben.warner@electrictwin.com. Love to chat to anyone if they're interested around how they might be able to use these synthetic populations to help, their organization make better, faster decision making.
Great. I'm excited to see it. I feel like it's going to really be a foundational part of kind of the transformation that we're in. I think you're in an amazing spot. So
thank you.
Yeah, it'd be amazing to track it.
Yeah, it's exciting times.
Thanks for coming.
Pleasure.
Cheers.